This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Some names get you. Do you get this, or is it me? Some names really get... If you said to me, what did Laura Trott become in 2023? I would have said something like Commonwealth cycling champion. I've just got the name Laura Trott. Why have I got the name Laura Trott associated with cycling? Is there another Trott? We got two Trotts. One's a cyclist and one's a politician. I thought Lottie had made a mistake then. I was buzzing upstairs going, no, Lottie, Laura Trott's not a chief secretary to the Treasury. She's a cyclist. But quite often when I think the newsreaders on LBC might have made a mistake, there's a little voice in my head that goes, it's probably you, mate. It's probably you that has made the mistake, and so it is on this occasion as well. She is indeed Chief Secretary to the Treasury this week. I actually, on a much more serious note, a quick word on one of the other stories that Lottie mentioned there, which is the resignation or the departure from politics of Mike Freer, a Justice Minister who is stepping down at the election and has cited a string of threats and incidents in culminating an apparent arson attack on his constituency office in December as reasons for his resignation. And I think with some justification, reasons for the campaign of abuse could be loosely described as his pro-Israel views. He's not a Jewish politician, although a lot of his critics seem to think that he is. He is, however, a fairly passionate advocate of the two-state solution that Benjamin Netanyahu seems so keen to wash his hands of. So once again, evidence that people motivated by, shall we say, incoherent fury often end up getting everything wrong. Sympathies and good wishes to Mike Freer. I think you'll allow me to mention the Daily Mail chooses to put this story on its front page, which, given a report that the Joe Cox Foundation put out last week about the abuses that many MPs face, none more, of course, than Diane Abbott, it is probably a moment to reflect upon the fact that when the terrorist killer of Joe Cox, who of course shouted out slogans that could have been lifted wholesale from the pages of the Daily Mail, when he was sentenced, the Daily Mail elected to put the story on page 30. So good to see them putting a story about a politician facing abuse on the front page on this occasion. Well done them. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know how much explanation you need this. There was a Laura Trott. And now she's Laura Kenny. So I'm not going mad. That's two Trotts, two Laura Trott. Honestly, you wait your whole career for one Laura Trott to come along and then two pop up at the same time. Yes, I thought so. I thought, thank you. Finally, someone's paying attention. I don't know what you know about growing up with an Irish name. Long before Nadine Dorries took to Twitter to accuse me of all manner of disgusting views regarding Islamist terrorism, by dint of having an apostrophe in my surname, I, along with all the other Irish kids at my prep school, would sometimes find ourselves abused in manners that we would now recognise as racist for supporting the IRA by dint of having an Irish name. My dad, of course, had an Irish surname, the same surname as me. That's often how it works. And his Irish surname, replete with apostrophes, would often appear on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, which was and remains an avowedly unionist organ. And that resulted in, actually, on the subject of hate mail, that resulted in some fairly grim items appearing in his mailbox when he was the Midlands correspondent of the Daily Telegraph. I mention this because for a younger generation, it's probably hard to imagine the United Kingdom itself being a crucible of hatred and vitriol. I'm speaking about Great Britain, really. I'm speaking about mainland Britain, based upon essentially sectarian violence and sectarian killings. The prospect of a united Ireland was but a distant dream, even for supporters of it and believers in it. I remember it'd be about when did Thatcher get in? 79. Then there was an election in 83, so it'd be 1983. I was such a pushy little fella at my school. I wanted to take part in the elections, but it was mostly sixth formers, and I was a couple of years off the sixth form. And of course, all the major parties had been snapped up by the big boys. So in Chaddesley Corbett in Worcestershire, in 1983, I stood as the SDLP candidate. That's in a specifically Northern Irish political party, speaking to the good pupils of a fee-paying Worcestershire boys' school, attempting to persuade them not to vote for the Conservative Party, for Margaret Thatcher's Conservative Party or Michael Foot's Labour Party, but to vote instead for, I think, Jerry Fitt's SDLP, and of course the SDLP and subsequent leaders went on to play an absolutely invaluable role in the peace process and in the journey towards and the completion of the Good Friday Agreement. So growing up with an Irish name, I didn't go to Ireland till I was well into my 20s. My first ever trip to Ireland was for very good historic reasons, actually, very good historic family reasons. I was invited to a Boys' Own concert. So I grew up thinking I was Irish and feeling I was Irish, even though I'd never been to Ireland. Being Irish essentially involved which rugby team you supported in the Six Nations and borrowing a shamrock off one of the Omani brothers on St. Patrick's Day to wear at school. That was about it. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. But the politics of it became more interesting to me as I got older. And the more I understood, the more inevitable it seemed to me that demographic change, more than anything else, would eventually see a majority of people in Northern Ireland wanting to return to the Republic of Ireland. Return is a slightly inappropriate word to use, actually. The history of the island of Ireland is a complicated and intricate business, but the concept of a united Ireland is not. And the more I understood about birth rates and population movement and demographics, the more I thought, well, yes, probably not quite in my lifetime, but eventually there will be a majority, and then the importance of that majority would grow, and eventually the pressure of the majority would have to be respected and deliver a united Ireland. You could say at this point that's not an opinion, it's counting. But of course Brexit changed that, or rather the Good Friday Agreement changed that. Because the Good Friday Agreement essentially meant that there wouldn't have to be that period of consolidation. Once there was a majority of people in Northern Ireland who wanted to be part of a united Ireland as opposed to part of the United Kingdom, there wouldn't have to be a sort of hardening of resolve. The minute there was a majority, or as soon as the question was put to the people, that would be enough to change the course of that country's history. The Good Friday Agreement essentially put in place a button which, when pushed, activates a plebiscite, activates a simple referendum, the result of which, in conjunction with the same result in the Republic of Ireland, there's something that people often overlook. You can't sort of make Northern Ireland part of a united Ireland while the Republic of Ireland is saying, no thanks, we're fine as we are. But that changed everything, although it probably wasn't fully appreciated at the time on this side of the sea, which is almost always the case with matters Irish in general and Northern Irish in particular. And then Brexit came along, when, of course, Northern Ireland was compelled not only to leave the European Union against the express wishes of its electorate, but also to deal with or to endure becoming the worst kind of political football, as the DUP used their leverage over Theresa May to essentially fly in the face of what the population of the country had called for. The DUP remained committed to essentially a much harder Brexit than the one that even Boris Johnson managed to smuggle through Parliament. And that, I think, puts even newer pressures upon the process. The notion that Brexit, sold to the British public as some sort of stiffening of the United Kingdom, some sort of strengthening of the United Kingdom, will probably end up hastening its genuine fracture. It will probably end up being a crucial catalyst for the actual collapse of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom in its current form will cease to exist. In fact, presumably, there might be a couple of anomalous islands nipping around the coast, like the Isle of Man or something, but I'm not entirely sure, forgive me. But if Ireland becomes united, does the United Kingdom cease to exist and Great Britain becomes the descriptor for what will remain? So, you know, your Faragist quotes, patriots, end quotes, committed to the idea of making the United Kingdom sovereign and powerful, will actually bear full, or at least a large amount of responsibility for destroying the United Kingdom in its current form. Well done, lads. Of course, at this point, it is customary to remember that everybody knew exactly what they were voting for. So when you voted for a stronger United Kingdom, you were crystal clear that you were actually voting for the destruction of the United Kingdom in its current form. But I could be getting ahead of myself. Michelle O'Neill and Mary Lou MacDonald, the leader and deputy leader of the Sinn Féin party, speaking at Stormont on Tuesday, describing the prospect of a united Ireland being within touching distance as the party prepares to claim the post of Northern Ireland First Minister for the first time. First Minister and Deputy First Minister are relatively meaningless terms. We had it explained to us rather well, didn't we, by the Belfast Telegraph columnist Alison Morris earlier this week. It essentially just defines or determines who shakes hand first with a visiting dignitary in terms of exercise of power within the executive, within the legislative. And the executive, actually, if my A-level politics is correct, they are equal roles. One is it's almost like it is a rotation. You take it in turns to be deputy and first minister in the context of Stormont. But it is quite a moment, really, albeit that I might need a little dilution from people better versed in Northern Irish politics, because a Sinn Féin politician saying that a united Ireland is within touching distance for the first time in living memory is a bit like, in one sense, it's a bit like a Brexiter talking about a sovereign Britain being a good thing. They would say that, wouldn't they? They would say that, wouldn't they? So there's the question. Forgive me for personalising it. I'm 52. I'm in fairly good nick, but I could probably be, particularly at this stage of life, I could probably be looking after myself a little better. But within reason, let's say 25 years, shall we? When and how, and of course if. So the prospect of a united Ireland, something which 10-year-old me, giving a speech in a gym in Worcestershire to 140 utterly baffled, about 125 utterly baffled schoolboys and 15 other lads with an apostrophe in their name. It was a Catholic school. 15 other lads with an apostrophe in their name all voting for me. I couldn't even tell you why. It just seemed historically unfair that the island of Ireland had been split down the middle. I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me the when, how, and the if. And ideally, we'll get many different questions to each one of those, many different answers to each one of those questions. How do you think it's going to happen? When do you think it's going to happen? And, of course, the if becomes, do you think it's going to happen? That should get us going, 0345 60 60973. But I also want you to tell me what it means, either to you or to history. What does it mean? For an awful lot of people listening to this, these are theoretical and largely nebulous notions. If you grew up in the 70s and the 80s as I did, then they will be rather more significant. You'll be rather more aware of the importance. But for anybody younger than that, it'll be like, oh yeah, okay. Really? It's two separate countries? I didn't realise that. I went there and you can't even tell anymore since the Good Friday Agreement. So when, how, and if, and then what does it mean to you? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. The time now is 10:16.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 10 is the time. Neil describes himself as a 38-year-old Irish listener in Forest Gate, and he puts things rather poetically. United Ireland is like a man walking on Mars for me. I'd love to see it in my lifetime, but I've got zero idea how the hell they get there. Well, we're here to help. Christopher is in Belfast, appropriately enough. Christopher, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. My second time speaking to you, but I'm still nervous about speaking to you and everything like that.
It's only me.
Well, just the one thing about I work as an historian of Ireland and Britain, and just the one thing, or the nuance about this, the first kind of nuance is that it's not necessarily uniting Ireland, it's reuniting Ireland, because Ireland has always been united as one state and as one island for thousands of years. And it was only in the 20th century that it then gets divided because the Unionists insisted upon having a partition of the island in that sense.
So, you've done it already. I did say it was complicated because if I had said united and independent Ireland, then you wouldn't have had a quibble with that description.
Yeah, exactly. No, totally. And as I said, it's just a nuance.
Yes, it is. You're right. Important.
I think. Well, exactly. And just Alison Morris is a great commentator. She's a really important writer over here in Northern Ireland at the moment. She's really significant. But the significance of Michelle O'Neill becoming First Minister is that was essentially what the Unionists and what Britain tried to make sure could never, ever happen in Northern Ireland's history, was that you inbuilt a Protestant and British majority of the state at all times. And so it is more significant than just being the same as the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister.
Historically significant. I think what I was doing and what I was alluding to there was the idea that that Geoffrey Donaldson was never going to accept it for sort of ideological reasons, whereas. And of course he has, but yeah, historically you're correct. In the short-term political moment, I think what I was alluding to there was the disproven idea that the Unionists could never go along with it, almost for reasons of pride.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think it has changed, and that is an important aspect of the peace process. Full stop. Has to kind of to detoxify some of these kind of things, because there is still a huge toxicity to all of these issues, especially within Northern Ireland, that isn't, and it's that toxicity that I think is probably not understood in England, Scotland and Wales, is about how toxic these issues can be. That's why the Scottish independence referendum in 2014 I thought was really important, because it did veer into toxicity at the very end. But the fact that the Scottish people were able to have a discussion about whether they left the Union or not, and for it not to become violent, is an important example for Northern Ireland now to kind of see that you can have discussions about the ending of the United Kingdom or not, and it doesn't have to involve violence, because that's the thing, that you can't turn the clock back. Once you've allowed the political violence to occur, you can't then detoxify it in that sense, where it takes a long time, so far as I can see, to even begin attempting to do those things.
Of course it does. Yeah, it's scars, isn't it? Scars that can be easily reopened. What role then? I mean, what do you see as the key catalysts in this process? Most obviously, the Good Friday Agreement, but Brexit as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, Brexit is the key thing, and that's why I voted Brexit.
Go on, tell me more. I mean, obviously, traditionally, I now have to tear your head off and bounce it around the studio before turning you into a viral clip, Christopher, but I'll spare you that for the time being. To explain the logic behind that.
Well, because I could see in 2016, when the debate was happening, that the Good Friday Agreement is up in the air, that is essentially Brexit was a vote on the Good Friday Agreement, and was, because if you're born from 1981 onwards in Northern Ireland, you have never been asked about the Good Friday Agreement. You've never been asked about the actual peace process itself. And so that was the only way I could see that as a Northern Irish person, you would actually definitively have a say over the Good Friday Agreement, or you could endorse it or not, was through actually that Brexit referendum. And all the people I voted on the same side as now tear their hair out about it. They're all unionists.
You've preempted my next question, which was to say how widespread a position was yours. Because you describe it with ineluctable logic, but it's a logic that passed a heck of a lot of voters and commentators by at the time.
Yeah, no one I know, no Republican I know voted Brexit, apart from me. I'm the only one I know who did it.
That's fantastic.
But the thing, it still makes me kind of laugh whenever I see all the unionists and DUP supporters.
Because you're saying, what did you think was going to happen, lads?
No, exactly. That was the thing that kind of I could see. But that's, I am different. I am weird. I recognise that exactly, James. So
and you prioritise the unification or the reunification over anything else as well, which puts you in there'll be plenty of Republicans who perhaps don't. They may be a little more pragmatic about other issues, or a bit more patient might be a good way of putting it. So I move to the final question, which is how and when?
I think conceivably within the next 5 to 10 years, it will occur.
Really?
And it's because in the South, now, if the Assembly gets back up and running, you're going to have Michelle O'Neill as First Minister, but in the South, they're going to have their election at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025 at the latest. I think it has to occur. But the Sinn Féin is polling as easily the largest party in the Southern Parliament, so they'll become the Taoiseach in the south. So they'll be leading governments on both sides of the border.
Still falls to Westminster to blow the whistle on referenda, though, doesn't it? It's not something that Taoiseach can do autonomously.
It does, exactly, and that's the real issue, and that's where I kind of hope that if Keir Starmer gets in, he would see the kind of historical necessity of allowing Ireland to have a referendum like this, that it is, in the same way that it was up to the Scottish people to decide what to do, it's up to Irish people to decide what to do.
I tell you what, Christopher, as if Keir Starmer's inbox wasn't busy enough, eh?
No, completely. But I hope, I don't know, but I hope, and he is a sensible politician. I think actually Keir Starmer. I don't agree with how much to the centre he's going, but at the same time, I accept that he is an intelligent man. Actually, or he's an intelligent guy. Actually, I think, and that he would see if there was a Sinn Féin government both sides of the border, that is an historical thing.
It becomes an irresistible force, as it were. Christopher, I remember your first call to the programme. I'm grateful once again for your cool expertise. Tinged, I think, with a little optimism, given your personal feelings, but it's optimism backed up with evidence. My favourite kind of optimism. Thank you, mate. 27 after 10 is the time. Michael's in County Louth. Michael, what would you like to say?
County Louth.
I know. Stop it. Carry on.
No, I just wanted to talk about the correlation between... By the way, I live in County Down. I live in the north.
Do you know what it is? It's because I had a caller from Lincolnshire the other day. And do you pronounce it? I can't keep up. I'm just going to start. What town are you in?
So I'm in Dundalk in County Louth.
Dundalk. I'll start again. Michael's in Dundalk. Yeah. Michael, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm from County Down, James. I cross the border every day for work.
Good Lord.
Proves that. Yes. It proves to me, it's the border. I drive down the motorway. It's nothing. The unit on the dashboard changes. That's all it does.
Sure. Yeah.
And then the currency. But no, I just wanted to talk about the correlation between Brexit and not just the prospect of United Ireland, but the interest that people of sort of my age took.
How old are you?
Well, I'm 27. I was at university during the 2019 election.
Right.
And we did an all-nighter in the student radio station, and we were seeing what the result was and stuff.
Fantastic.
And I remember I walked back from the radio station back to my digs, and there was fireworks going off because of the result. And I thought, none of these people who the sort of ERG supporting people, none of these people actually have any idea of what that's going to mean for me when I go home.
No,
I was at university in at University of Chester, but I was up in Warrington.
Yeah.
So we done that. But
so they were celebrating essentially a tin full of that Boris Johnson had told them was full of jewels, but they were yet to open the tin.
Yeah. And that election campaign really, really opened. Like I did vote against leaving the European Union in 2016. I had a vague. I think I was just 18 then, but I had a vague understanding of it then. But that 2019 election really, really opened my eyes.
So it has focused the mind of many Northern Irish people on two things: politics in general and the completely disproportionate influence that Westminster has over the province, over the region, over the country.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just like it didn't just open my eyes to politics. It really reinforced my. I'm from a Catholic, nationalist sort of background. Went to a Catholic school and that, but I didn't really have any sort of opinions on thing. I played Gaelic football and stuff. I probably would have called myself Irish, but
sure.
But when I come back from university, my last term actually got cut short by COVID. But when I come back, I had such a sort of reinforced sense of my sort of Irish nationalism and republicanism because of how I seen that we were treated by the Westminster establishment and how little regard they had for the North, And
something that keeps getting confirmed and reinforced with every new wrinkle of the sort of Brexit aftermath. Michael, I'm a little late for the news. It's the only reason I'm moving on. I love that idea of a not apolitical but slightly disengaged young person being absolutely drawn in by this and rendered, as he said himself, more Republican than he was in the first place. Something else that, of course, all the people who sold you Brexit either didn't understand or didn't tell you. 10:30 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. Weird, isn't it, how that dreaded B word, and I do appreciate some people wish that we never had to talk about it again. I feel for you, I really do, but it's a bit like, I suppose it's a bit like insisting that you never talk about an arson attack after it's finished and the conversation moves to the question of rebuilding and repairing. It's just an impossible dream that you have there. And I know you didn't realise you were contributing to the arson attack when you voted in 2016. But Kemi Badenoch, do you remember on Monday, she told Parliament that the talks over a trade deal with Canada were ongoing negotiations after they stopped because, well, very few people in the British government had understood what being a third country would mean, and Canada was preparing to put, I think, 250% tariffs on some products, including cheese and other things. Someone's decided to just check in with Canada on whether or not Kemi Badenoch was telling the truth, and I think you might be interested in the answer, which we'll share with you in just over 10 minutes' time. Gerald is in Belfast to steer us back to the when, the how, and even the if of a united Ireland. What would you like to say, Gerald?
Hey James.
Hey.
I'm ringing from Belfast, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
Just a couple of observations on your topic. A very wise man here once said, you can't possibly unite Ireland without first uniting Northern Ireland. I firmly believe that, and sadly, James, despite the fact that the Good Friday Agreement achieved the miracle of stopping the ghastly and barbaric violence that we had here for 25 years, it was like a slow civil war.
Yes.
It has done absolutely nothing to unite Northern Ireland, and my position is, if you try to unite Ireland without uniting Northern Ireland first, you're going to get into very big trouble.
Well, yes. Who was the very wise man? Can you remember? Was it you?
No, it wasn't me, but I have been told that it was John Hume, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
I was about to say I wouldn't have been surprised if it was John Hume. I mean, we're talking about degrees, aren't we? Because the cessation of hostilities, the cessation of violence, is a step towards unification or some such, but it's not. I mean, you're not talking about a 100% support for a united Ireland, surely.
No, actually, that was my next point.
Yes.
Imagine we have a plebiscite, a poll, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure down south there will be a strong vote for a united Ireland, so I think that's almost a given. In Northern Ireland, you could easily get a Brexit outcome. You could easily get something like 52-48, 51-49. And if that was for a united Ireland, you're in very dangerous territory.
Come on, rubbish. I've got personal experience of a referendum where the result was 52-48, and it's all gone absolutely brilliantly. Everybody lived happily ever after. What planet are you on, Gerald? So that's a question of timing as well. So even though they may have the power to press the button, they would be, Sinn Féin on both sides would be well advised to perhaps wait a while. But how long? When do you think? Christopher thought 5 to 10 years. I sense you don't.
No, I sense a poll in that time.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think if there is a poll in that time, it'll probably be to remain in the Union, but I may be wrong about that.
Really?
But what really worries me is this whole thing of losers' consent. If we had a narrow poll in favour of United Ireland, we can't assume that all those who were on the other side of this are simply going to go along with it. I think my understanding of Northern Ireland, it's still a very dangerous place. The violence is over, one would like to think, for good, but the place is not united. It's still a very deeply tribal and sectarian society, and I think very often that isn't understood in England, James.
I sort of slightly rose-tinted Good Friday Agreement view from the other side of the sea. But I mean, we've only alluded to Brexit. Previous callers have made quite a big deal of it, I think correctly. Let me read you this, which I think speaks for a lot of people that I have heard from over the last few years. If you'd asked me at the start of 2016 to vote for a united Ireland, I'd have said no. I come from a nationalist area, but the whole issue for me was a non-runner. Relations between the UK and the Republic were good. We were both getting the benefits of EU membership. Now I'd be first at the polling station. It's all come down to Brexit and for the pro-Brexit unionist parties in Northern Ireland, not only misjudging the results of the referendum or the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, they've also alienated a number of voters who they need to secure a Remain vote in any future border poll. I get that from what you might call moderate unionists as well, that the unnecessary chaos and the presumption of the unionist parties has hemorrhaged support in some quarters.
The problem is people like Jeffrey Donaldson were warned that Brexit would destabilise Northern Ireland from a unionist perspective.
Yes.
Jeffrey got it into his head that Brexit was going to make Northern Ireland ever more British, when many people warned him, no, it'll make it ever more Irish.
Yes, of course.
And it will make it less British. So what he's been doing in recent days is a desperate repair job to try and undo some of the damage that his beloved Brexit caused. So as in the UK, where Brexit has been a monumental disaster, in my opinion, in Northern Ireland,
it's not an opinion, that's just counting.
Well, there you go. I don't think the Brexiteers ever thought, though, or ever cared about the impact of Northern Ireland.
I'd go with the never cared. Well, it was the same as never thought, and certainly if they ever did think about it, they never understood it, and that is the mark, really, of the people who like to call themselves Brexiteers. Gerald, thank you. It's coming up, just gone 22:11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Gerald has nailed it, writes Nigel Boone in Belfast. There is still so much near racial hatred on both sides over here. That probably is a bit rose-tinted from over here, Nigel, because it is, by any measure, a lot better than it was. The question is what might be resurrected or revivified by a referendum, by a plebiscite. And I mean, it's too serious to joke about, but, you know, we have learned some fairly grisly lessons about what happens when referendums are governed at least as much by emotion as they are by evidence. Luke is in Derry. Luke, what would you like to say?
Well, in terms of your question as to when and how, they're sort of interlinked, and they speak to one of your previous callers. As far as the next 5 to 10 years is concerned, I don't see that as a runner at all, and I don't think that nationalists or Republicans or Sinn Féin will be looking for that, because anecdotally speaking, I mean, I come from a nationalist background in Derry, and speaking to uncles, aunts, parents who again grew up in that nationalist background, saw the discrimination. My father grew up in the shadow of the bogs. I would have heard the gunshots on Bloody Sunday. They are more pragmatic. And a word that constantly comes up is, well, what about my pension? What about this pension that I've paid Andy for the last 20, 30 years? Yes. So in terms of when it's going to happen, I think that the movers and shakers within republicanism want to, and it sounds quite morbid, wants those people to die.
Yes.
and the younger...
Except that a settlement could accommodate things like that. That would be...
Sure.
It would depend a lot on who's in Westminster and how much enthusiasm they have for the breakup of the United Kingdom, which is an odd thing for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to contemplate, and probably a very difficult thing for any Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in the current context to be supportive of.
And I think if everybody's being honest with themselves, Westminster, England, I imagine if you did a poll, they don't want us. We're a hindrance. We're a drain.
Well, they're the only people that won't be asked.
We're expensive, and as the way I look at it, the people who want to remain, it's almost masochistic. They're clinging to somebody who's trying desperately to kick them off.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it is the Conservative and Unionist Party, at least in name.
Nominally,
it's more about prioritising emotion over principle, isn't it? Or emotion over advantage. It's a Brexity thing. Like, they would rather be on a boat with a British bridge, a British admiral on the bridge that is sinking, than they would be on a boat with an Irish admiral on the bridge that is, or a Catholic admiral on the bridge that is the finest vessel that the Seven Seas has ever seen. That's where the people you describe are coming from, I think.
There's a particularly loud, empty vessel over here who I think, to quote him, said, "I would rather, now I'm paraphrasing, choke on my own blood in Britain than walk on streets paved with gold in a United Ireland."
That's precisely the point I'm making, and it's incredible. It's very hard unless you are similarly, and your brains have been similarly boiled. It's very, very hard to get inside that kind of mindset, isn't it?
Well, they would class themselves as more British than anybody in Britain.
Yes, and that's part, and that is going to be the problem that Gerald alluded to. The question is how much traction do those people get? How much support do they garner, and how much damage do they do, despite being in a minority, in the event of the referendum result going against them, in order to try to, kind of use a phrase that is talk about a cat among the pigeons, in order to defy the will of the people. Luke, great stuff. Thank you. It's coming up to 11:15. After the break, Kemi Badenoch told Parliament on Monday that the negotiations with the Canadian government were ongoing. One journalist has had the wit to ask Canada whether that is true or not. And you'll find out after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. I see Ed Davey has published a piece in The Guardian in the last few minutes addressing the fairly widespread attempts to pin a lot of responsibility for the Post Office Horizon scandal on him. He was the relevant minister for, I think, 19 months of the relevant period. Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, will be speaking to us exclusively, actually, on this. There's something I don't often say. Speaking to us exclusively on this programme in just under an hour's time. So if there's something that you think I should be putting to him, or indeed something that you think he should be compelled to address, then do get in touch with me in all the usual ways. To give you an idea of where he is coming from this morning, the headline on the article is, "I fell for Post Office lies and I'm sorry, but I won't be silent as Tories prey on victims' trauma." Before that, Kemi Badenoch this week appeared before the committee, speaking to Liam Byrne at the Business and Trade Committee about her apparently quite petulant decision to call time on negotiations with Canada over a trade deal. We need it because the sort of rollover that was in place after Brexit is set to expire, I think, on April the 1st. And if there is not a new trade deal in place, then there will be all manner of problems, not least for the automakers, for the car industry, who would face tens of millions of pounds in tariffs because their supply chain is embedded in the EU automotive industry. My understanding of these matters depends largely on the work of excellent journalists like Peter Foster at the Financial Times, who talks to us often, and Graham Langtry at Politico, who similarly keeps us up to speed with unfolding developments. And before we hear from Graham, let me remind you what Badenoch told the House of Commons during a debate on Monday when questioned by Liam Byrne, who is chair of the Business and Trade Committee. It was in the House, not before committee. She said, "This is a good opportunity for me to state explicitly that the talks have not broken down." She said the two sides, quotes, "have an ongoing rules of origin discussion," end quotes, but added, "We are also having multiple discussions with Canada on cheese, in which we have not come to an agreement." This, of course, reflects the fact that British cheesemakers' special access to Canada's market has already expired. It expired at the start of the year. So there you go. The Secretary of State for Business, explicit and adamant that A, the talks have not broken down, and B, there are ongoing discussions about rules of origin. Graham Langtry is the UK trade reporter at Politico Europe, and I think perhaps uniquely in the British media, he had the wizard wheeze of deciding to ask the Canadians. Graham, what did they say?
Thanks, James. Well, I am Canadian, so I still maintain ties to Canada. Just one point: it's not that the UK-Canada trade deal, the current one, will dissolve on April 1st. It's just specifically the rules of origin issue. The deal will stay in place until there's a new one, but this rules of origin provision, which allows British manufacturers to use EU parts in their products
without paying tariffs.
Without paying tariff, precisely. That the UK automotive industry's supply chains are, embedded into the EU. So having these rules dissolve will be a big hit for British manufacturers, and cars are in the top 5 exports that Britain sends over to Canada.
Really? About £745 million a year.
Precisely.
And that's in genuine jeopardy, you would say?
Well, what could happen is that those vehicles will be taxed. And so manufacturers might not want to send as many. And those tariffs really impact consumers in Canada who may not, because those costs will be passed along to them, they may not want to choose a British vehicle because it's suddenly, several percent more expensive.
So you went to Global Affairs Canada, who are the relevant body for these issues, and you essentially asked them whether or not they recognise the version of events that Kemi Badenoch had shared with the House of Commons on Monday.
I did, and they said that the idea that there are ongoing rules of origin discussions is inaccurate. They also said that the idea that there's multiple discussions with Canada on cheese that are potentially ongoing, Kemi Badenoch's words are kind of vague, exactly what she means. But there's no discussions on cheese. All of these things are tied into the negotiations for a new trade deal that Badenoch walked away from last Thursday.
As an expert in these matters yourself, was this is she trying to play hardball, do you think? Because we had during the last, at every stage of negotiations, conservative politicians, pro-Brexit conservative politicians have given the impression that they believe that they have enormous heft and leverage at negotiation tables, and the reality often turns out to be otherwise. Do you think we're seeing another episode of that? Leaving aside for the moment the question that she effectively stands accused of misleading Parliament, because that's become almost par for the course for this government. But on that issue of heft and tactics, what's your reading of the situation?
If this is a negotiating strategy to get the Canadians to budge, they're not going to budge at all. As one Canadian official told me, this strategy will only produce a hit to UK businesses. Canada really wants Kemi Badenoch to get back to the negotiating table. It's up to the UK whether or not they do that. But talks did reach a stalemate last autumn, and that was over Canada's continuing pressure to try and get the UK to allow hormone-treated beef, that same issue with the United States trade deal, into the British market, because Canada's beef market is tied to the US, and they have very, very similar standards.
And that's a red line, actually, for Rishi Sunak, isn't it? Despite the fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg told me some years ago he's an enormous fan of hormone-treated beef, at least for other people to eat. That is a Rishi Sunak red line, which perhaps people don't fully appreciate.
It is, yeah. But we obtained some leaked memo that was sent internally by one of the most senior trade negotiators that was produced last June, that Rishi Sunak had actually directed Kemi Badenoch and them to slow down trade negotiations with Canada and Mexico so that they could focus on getting a deal with India.
Extraordinary stuff. Where would you put your money come April the 1st? Will this have been ironed out, or do you think we're going to see a cliff edge of sorts?
I think it's really up to Kemi Badenoch and whether or not she gets back to the table.
And why wouldn't she? Because she won't get enough in return to even sell it to readers of the Daily Express as a positive. Potentially.
She's between a rock and a hard place, really. And if you look at it, this is what trade negotiations are all about, and they can be very difficult and very acrimonious between two different countries. Canada, people like to think that we're all nice and quite friendly.
Do they?
We like to think that we are. But when it comes to trade negotiations, beef and dairy are very important to the Canadian government, because Alberta and Quebec are essential provinces which produce beef and dairy, are essential provinces to winning the next Canadian election, which is going to happen in 2025.
Graham Langtry, as always, the UK trade correspondent at Politico. Thank you for your time and your scoops. The man's a scoop machine. I should add that perhaps speaking to the acrimony that Graham referenced there, a spokesperson for Cammy Badenoch's department, the Department for Business and Trade, said, we disagree with the assessment. So the Canadians have said, no, there is no talks. Cammy Badenoch says, yes, there are. And her department says, yes, no, we disagree with the people on the other side of the negotiating table who say they aren't having any talks with us at the moment. And there you go, in another slightly nutty nutshell. That is Brexit Britain. 10:58 is the time. And I back to the other consequence, another consequence, arguably a rather more epochal or historical consequence, which is the likelihood of a united Ireland. Let's hop over the now invisible border, all the calls so far from the north of the island. Let's head to Dublin. Paul is there. Paul, what would you like to say?
James, how's it cutting? Listen, you haven't got much time, so I'll fly through this. So I'm a mongrel. I was born in England of Irish parents, lived there till I was 10, then we relocated back to Ireland.
Okay.
My life in England up to the age of 10 was fine and no issues whatsoever. Ireland was sold by the family as this idyllic place to come. Came to Dublin in 1971 with a broad Cockney accent. And I had hell in school for the next however many years because I was just seen by all the IRA sympathisers as a Brit.
Okay.
So Ireland certainly wasn't idyllic for me. But the point I just wanted to make was that you will, and it was kind of mentioned, you will never solve the problem. And you use the term footballification all the time.
I do.
That's the problem. People wrapping themselves in flags. So if you have a united Ireland, which I think you will, you'll just transfer the problem. Instead of having the Republicans fighting for United Ireland, you'll have the Loyalists freaking out and going nuts.
You'd still have a rump of Loyalist agitators, and the question then becomes, where will the line be between agitation and something worse?
Yeah, and it'll be a significant rump as well, I think, James. And by the way, I heard an interview one time with Andrew Trimble, who's an ex-rugby player for Ireland, coming from the Protestant tradition. And it was about this discussion, actually. And he laughed at one point, and the interviewer said to him, why are you laughing, Andrew? And he says, well, I just want to let you know, I only met my first Catholic when I was 21.
That's,
so
extraordinary.
You have people, go up the Falls Road. It's all green, white and orange and murals of their heroes. Go up the Shankill Road, which is a stone's throw away, a big wall separating it, and it's all red, white and blue and all their heroes, until you solve the problem of people thinking they are a product of the land of their birth. That's the issue. We should not allow the curse of the land of our birth dictate who we are. And until they get rid of all that, you will never solve this problem. And
an echo, actually, of a point made previously, and one that perhaps on this side of the sea we are sometimes a little bit naive about. Thank you, Paul. It's just gone 11 o'clock. David Davis, seeing as we're tucking into a bit of Brexit today, David Davis was on with Andrew Marr last night. I don't know if you heard it. Andrew asked him, I thought very cleverly, what marks out of 10 he'd give to the success of Brexit so far. What do you think David Davis answered? Former Brexit Secretary, of course, who not only insisted that we'd be signing a deal in Berlin on the day after leaving the European Union, but despite that astonishing display of ignorance, ended up being Brexit Secretary and turned up for the first round of negotiations with no paperwork. By any measure, the man's a genius. So what did he say? Well, marks out of 10 for the success of Brexit. Did he say 2 out of 10, 4 out of 10, 6 out of 10, 8 out of 10, or 10 out of 10? I'll tell you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11, and towards the end of this hour, Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, will be speaking to us exclusively about that story, leading Lottie's bulletin a moment ago, the apology that he has issued over the post office scandal, and I think his attempts to set the record straight. But that'll be here shortly. 5 after 11 is the time. A bit of a change of pace now, so a bit of a change of direction. Remember, it's Thursday, so Mystery Hour will be with us at 12. And I got some quite exciting news about Mystery Hour as well for you, which you won't want to miss. But I don't know what to do with stories like this. I think I do. I think I just ask you to tell me what is going on. But what I don't want to do is start from the position that it's not true, or that the people in the story are definitely and 100% in the wrong. It's quite interesting how different organs treat the same story, isn't it? I point this out to you on several occasions. So the Daily Mail goes down that road that I just described a moment ago, where they are essentially telling the people in the story that they are wrong. The headline they've got is "You poor things!" ! 1 in 4 men think women have it easier. And then they write a story about a quarter of men aged between 16 and 59 who believe that they have it tougher in life than their female counterparts. The Guardian, perhaps predictably, takes a rather more sophisticated approach to the story and describes boys and men from Generation Z as being more likely than older baby boomers to believe that feminism has done more harm than good. And I think the demographic breakdown here is probably more interesting than the broader figure. It describes a real risk, in the words of the researchers at King's College, of fractious division among this coming generation. I think one of the many mistakes I've made on the programme is deciding, probably this time last year or thereabouts, that the alleged people trafficker Andrew Tate was best ignored. I sometimes work on the principle that providing any oxygen at all to people who are desperate for your attention is the wrong thing to do. And I think that's the wrong thing to do, funnily enough. I think, obviously, when people become a problem, even if they've become a problem in the shadows, when it becomes a big enough problem that teachers and parents were messaging me and contacting me privately to say, you've got to talk about this. We've got a real problem. We've got boys turning up at school with incredibly misogynistic and sort of Neanderthal. It's not fair on Neanderthals, but you know what I mean. Incredibly misogynistic attitudes towards women, and there is a failure to understand the scale of the problem. Well, here perhaps is some evidence of where that problem has led. He is, of course, Tate himself is facing charges in Romania of human trafficking, rape, and forming a criminal gang to sexually exploit women. He has talked about, on the record, about hitting and choking women and described himself as absolutely a misogynist. So it sort of becomes a badge of pride to be misogynistic in this world. There's another person I thought was probably best ignored, an author called Jordan Peterson, who 32% of 16 to 29-year-old men see favourably. Women of the same generation see him favourably. Just 12% see him favourably. And he claims to speak up for demoralised young men and says that Tate offers forthright aggression as an alternative to cringing defeat. Peterson deserves some sympathy in recent years for, I would never dream of describing it as cringing defeat. I don't know what he means by that phrase, but despite apparently being a cheerleader for this sort of a toxic masculinity, you might describe it as, he has developed a habit in recent years of bursting into tears in interviews, and I think he's struggled quite badly with his own mental health, and yet, to my untutored eye, he seems to be one of the chief cheerleaders of describing things like concern about mental health as being a negative or undesirable. So it is a confusing business, isn't it? But what's not confusing are the statistics. The proportion of men aged 16 to 29 who think feminism has done more harm than good is, well, at the very least, it is worryingly high. How you've ended up thinking that A, you have it harder than women, and B, feminism has been a force for bad, is, to my 52-year-old male eyes, extraordinary, truly extraordinary. And I want you to tell me how it's happened, possibly by telling me about your son or your partner. And listen, if I said to you, is it possible that they have a point? Would you be cross with me for even asking the question? Because this is the problem I have when I say I think that it's best not to give these people the oxygen of publicity. But then what plants flourish in the darkness? Mushrooms. They're like mushrooms. You know, people like me refuse to turn the light on. And I've only got a smallish radio show, but probably a slightly disproportionate profile on social media and elsewhere, because there are, only about 2 people in the entire country speaking from an essentially leftish position in legacy media. Everybody else is either right-wing or impartial. So if people like me don't shine light into the mushroom farm, then do the mushrooms grow out of control? So when I say to you, is there any argument at all that these people might have a point? What would that point be? So what would the proof be for you or for someone you know that feminism well, crucially, that women have it easier than men in the modern world? What are they actually talking about when a quarter of that part of the population, a quarter of that demographic, 1 in 4 UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it is harder to be a man than a woman. Now, I only have daughters and obviously a wife, so I don't have a particular insight into this. I have godsons who have been briefly entranced by Andrew Tate before the adults in their lives, myself included, found out and were able to conduct fairly straightforward and obvious conversations about whether or not you'd want to treat your cousin like that, or whether you treat your sister like that, or whether you talk about your mum like that. And I'm probably very naive when I say that I found those to be very effective ways of defusing some of the poison that these lads were ingesting. But where does the poison lead? What would they point at? What would they say was the proof that women have it harder than men? I beg your pardon, that men have it harder than women. 03456060973. That's the bit that interests me most. What are their points? What are their arguments? Where is their evidence? What would a Peterson or a Tate offer up? A man who speaks enthusiastically about assaulting women. What would they offer up as proof that women have an easier ride in life than men do, even in the era of Me Too and discovering the full extent of not just misogyny but also sexual abuse at almost every level of life for women through the ages. So I want to know that. And the second question is probably easier to answer. It's how has this happened? Professor Rosie Campbell, who's the director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's, said that the fact that this group is the first to derive most of their information from social media is likely to be at least part of the explanation. She describes a zeitgeist where young women feel they can own the idea of feminist identity, and young men hear a lot about girl power but don't, at this stage in their lives, understand the inequalities that we know are in the world when you hit work and childcare. And that's kind of where my point comes from, is that my life is full of women in their 40s and 50s who were every bit as talented and as ambitious as the men that they married or the men that they had children with. And yet, in most cases, the division of labour became such that the woman's career suffered and the man's career flourished. Now, during the period of child rearing, that there can seem to be perhaps some balance there, and there will be men who find themselves wishing that they could have spent more time with their children when they were growing up. But when you come to contemplate the rest of your life, that most basic of inequalities, that is not universal but is fairly commonplace, and I think a fairly uncontroversial observation, makes it, for people my age, absolutely impossible to understand how young men can think that women have it easier. So where does it come from? And, of course, what is the evidence? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. It's coming up to 11:15. The question I'm asking you is built upon social media being blamed as more Generation Z boys and men actively regard feminism as harmful. I suppose, alongside the other questions I've asked, I'm asking what that actually means. What does that mean, either semantically or in terms of impact? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I did it, didn't I? I forgot to tell you. David Davis, asked by Andrew Marr last night what he would give Brexit, marks out of 10. Did he say 2 out of 10, 4 out of 10, 6 out of 10, 8 out of 10, or 10 out of 10? I won't tease you with the answer. I shall leave you to mull it over before we resume this conversation in a few moments. David Davis, the former Brexit secretary, who insisted that we'd be signing trade deals in Berlin the morning after Brexit, and that the German car industry and the French wine industry and all the rest of it wouldn't possibly tolerate the notion of us having tariff-free friction at our borders. Absolutely adamant that they needed us more than we needed them, proved wrong about every single element of the promises that he made to the British people, told Andrew Marr last night that he would give Brexit 8 out of 10. And that, I'm afraid, is an indication of just how bonkers everything still is.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 11. This is interesting. This text says, I'll be interested in seeing what the demographics were that took part in this survey. I'm black, almost 50, with a 21-year-old boy and nephews aged 21 to 27. This is something that they've never thought about or considered, as they have other barriers and factors which make life a little more difficult. Skin colour being the obvious factor. And I completely get where you're coming from, Leon, but actually minority ethnic men are most likely to follow Tate, with more than a third agreeing that he raises important points about real threats to male identity and gender roles, where the figure is closer to 12%, so way below half when it comes to white men. I don't know what to make of that, but it flies in the face of what you would have presumed, what you do presume, Leon, which again is probably another reason why we should talk about this stuff more, even as we find a lot of it distasteful. Conrad is in Holland Park. Conrad, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
It just so coincided that last weekend I was having a family dinner with my friends, and we got into a massive row about homophobia, racism, misogyny. It all just kind of like erupted, and there was a point where at first I thought, okay, maybe it's a joke, but it just got more intense. And I believe the reasons embedded with it, and by the way, this is with a Jamaican group, and I'm South African myself.
Okay.
And part of it is cultural pride. And then the other part of it, I believe, is how social media is intoxicated us into, believing that our opinions, no matter how crazy they are validated because there are others out there.
Yeah, we used to be able to leave that to radio phone-ins, Conrad, but now it's everywhere. What do you mean by cultural pride?
Well, so basically for myself, my own heritage. My mum's white South African, my dad is Tswana speaking, so black South African.
Okay.
So over the past 5 years in London, I've been hanging with a lot of Jamaican people and been learning more about their culture.
Yes.
And I think at the moment,
don't say anything you don't want to say. I don't, because I'm hoping to learn from you, but I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable. Okay.
I just don't want to misrepresent anything.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Basically, one of my good friends, he was like, and this is more about homophobia, and not misogyny.
Okay.
And he was like, it is. According to Rastafarian culture, that is not okay. No homosexuality. And he felt he has an obligation to uphold his culture no matter what. And I kept on going, and at one point I left the table because
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't do this. And he came to me and said, man, I'm sorry, but you just have to understand, I would not be a man if another man did that to me. And at that point, I realized that there was a lot of fear in that, a lot of fear.
Yes.
And I think
it's not confined to Rastafarianism. There's a heck of a lot of religions that preach similarly and end up with similar consequences. I've spoken to a few on the program, and I do, and fascinating though that is, and I'd love to talk about it again. I want to steer you back to the misogyny and the question of how, because you're young. I think you said.
Yeah,
how do we know this is new? Because especially, was it an all-male gathering? I mean, men throughout the ages, when their gatherings are unleavened by female presence, they can say things and express views that they wouldn't dream of saying in other companies. So how do you know that your generation's problem is new in the context of social media and other influences and influencers?
Well, James, I was raised, I was brought up in an all-boys school.
Yeah, same.
In South Africa. And this was started school in 2014. So at this point, social media was just kind of on the rise. It was there, but it wasn't as prevalent and it wasn't as insidious as it is now. And even in an all-boys school, I felt that, yes, there was a certain level of misogyny, which I think you could kind of attribute to the immaturity.
Yes.
But it didn't feel that bad. But since, I would say, 2019, especially with the rise of TikTok,
right,
I think there's been a massive change because things have become so specific. And the reason why I kind of know this is at these family gatherings, there are women involved. They are the minority figures. There's 2 other women with us.
Okay.
And not me, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I am part of the problem.
But
as a group, sorry, I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But as a group, you get into this mindset and it can be so vocal and loud that, the women who are there, honestly, they're not fine with it, but they just they get overpowered.
They're bombarded. They're sort of drowned. And what are we talking? Sort of blatant objectification, or worse, or men have the right to do this because you've got the trad wife movement growing at the same time. This idea of wives being completely subservient to their husbands. What sort of thing? What do you think you routinely witness from your friends that I, as a 52-year-old man who's closer to you, I think, in outlook, would find shocking? What are the sort of headlines or highlights, for want of a better word?
The double standards is a big one, especially with promiscuity. With my friends, it's, for a male to have multiple partners at one time, that's acceptable.
Right.
But for his partner to have, the same thing, it's a complete betrayal.
So that's almost a notion of ownership again, isn't it?
Yeah. Once again, a word that's thrown around is wife. I want a wife. And it's not really intended in, a marriage is supposed to be a joint partner where you share your lives with each other equally through health and sickness. But that's not what's happening here. It is ownership, 100%.
And how many of your group are kind of following the figures like this Andrew Tate character? Is that something that's part of their sphere?
When Andrew Tate first came on the scene, before, everything was found out about him, a lot of people were into him. They were
What's the appeal? What's the appeal, Conrad? In a nutshell, what is it? Exactly. I read you what... this is really interesting, actually, from Shalina, who was also in touch yesterday. She does a brilliant podcast here at LBC. She says the reason that ethnic minority men and also Muslim men find traditionalist men like Tate appealing is because it gives them a male privilege in a hierarchy where they are already low down. So it's easier to keep their own ethnic minority stroke Muslim women down in order to give themselves some status. And it's therefore easier to blame women who have even less voice to push back, which you just described almost word for word, than the overall hierarchy. It's better to have some power than none. The same applies, oddly, to young white men blaming people of colour for, quotes, taking over, end quotes. It gives them power in a system that has taken away their power. But it says in both cases, hey, look over there, it's the brown people's fault. Or in this case, it's the women's fault. That resonates with me. That makes sense. Do you think?
I suppose a part of it is that when Andrew Tate, comes on the scene and let's say a man with liberal views, I take it, you're kind of repulsed from the get-go, aren't you?
I didn't know enough about him to be repulsed, actually. I thought he was just all about big cars and sort of ostentatious showing off of money. I just thought he was a therapist's dream, really, in terms of insecurity and fears about his... I presumed he had a terrible relationship with his mum, if I'm honest with you. I didn't really think about it much more deeply than that.
Well,
Then I was repulsed, and that plays into perhaps what both you and Shalina have said. Conrad, thank you. I'm going to crack on because we're quite short of time for this topic, and there's a heck of a lot of people that want to talk about it. Ben's in Reading. Ben, what do you want to say?
Hi, I'm a student. I'm late 17, and it's so much more widespread than people think among young boys. Put
it into words for me, Ben. The it that you're describing.
It's this sort of anti-liberal nationalism. It's not just about things like LGBT. It's also about sort of left-wing, right-wing. It's there's hatred of immigrants is very, very prevalent. I mean, obviously, I'd say it's more anti-trans. I'd say is the biggest one.
Okay.
It's huge. I'd say if I asked an average boy in my college, it would be maybe 70% of them anti-trans.
Okay.
And not even just like.
And where's that coming from? Because oddly, there's some brilliant research out today by Best for Britain that Carol Vorderman was showing me earlier, showing that the newspapers that I obsess about are increasingly less influential. The massive majority of people who read all of the newspapers that I blame for most of the country's ills, the readers actually want a change of government. So their ludicrous shilling for the Tories and client journalism isn't working. Where are your generation getting their anti-trans rhetoric from?
Newspapers, they have no influence on my generation.
I know that.
It's gone. It's all social media. It's things like TikTok, for example.
Okay.
If they're on, and the problem with that is the algorithm there, it puts you into people who have the same opinions as you. So it's just a massive echo chamber. So if you're anti-trans, you're going to see anti-trans things.
You're going to get more and more
like that.
grist for your mill. Where does the idea come from that women have it easier than men, do you think?
Because they see things. So these people who post this anti-trans stuff and anti-women stuff,
yes,
they find this data and they cherry pick it. So they'll see something like the one I always see, and as sad as it is and horrendous as it is, they always mention the male suicide rate.
Right.
About how it's considerably higher than women, or I don't know how.
But it always has been, as far as I know.
But it always has been.
Yes.
And they take this data and they say, oh, automatically it must be worse than men and worse for men.
I think prison. You'd probably reach for prison as well,
prison,
would you? At
things
this
like
point,
that.
Okay.
And they see this as like, but they don't take into the other things, and they see, oh well, they're equal under the law, and they take all of these sort of dog whistles, and they'll mention things like the gender pay gap, and say, oh, it's not actually real because the law actually protects it or something, but they don't take into account like the biases and it's just like they take things for face value, and they don't want to do any research into it. They just take what they're
So you
told,
start from a position, because this is, I think, the thing I've always found odd. It's a desire to be aggrieved. It's people who want to be victims.
Definitely.
Which takes us, Brexit's turning behind it's round every corner today, isn't it? But this desire to actually, so people with privilege, because as men, obviously you have privilege, you want to believe that you're actually being victimised. And the proof is the proclivity of men to commit violent crime, or the proclivity of men not to talk about their feelings and therefore end up struggling to cope with their mental health and taking the worst imaginable decision. I mean, it's so self-defeating. It makes a bad situation worse, the approach that you describe. There's
also the other thing I see, especially on TikTok, I can't believe most of it's real, but I'm pretty sure like these sort of so like Reform UK, they're like the UKIP-esque party. They spend, or they have thousands of people in the comments of these videos saying, I'll be voting Reform UK, I'm done with the Tories, I'm done with Labour. And it's like, I don't believe it's that amount. If you went off polling just by them comments, thousands of them, it will be every single person will be saying vote Reform UK. And I know their polling is not high enough for that.
That's Richard Tice's party, is it?
Yeah.
So is that astroturfing? Is that the word?
It has to be.
No, but is that the word? If it were some sort of orchestrated marketing or public relations campaign, and we don't know that, although, like you, it seems a little odd that polling should be so low when what you encounter on social media is apparently so high. That I think that is what the technical term is. And it's odd, isn't it, how those kind of anti-immigration tropes do always go hand in hand with, as Ben describes them, anti-women tropes. It is odd that, but less odd the more you think about it. We've used the word othering an awful lot on this programme over the years, and it doesn't really matter what the target is. A certain type of person can't wait for you to give them permission to attack it. 11:31 is the time. Lottie Morley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:35. Mystery Hour on the way at 12. Your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of intellectual satisfaction not available anywhere else on your radio. Before that, this is just interesting, isn't it? And it's worrying. And I think there is a danger of, I mean, in some ways it's Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, isn't it? It's tolerating the intolerant, having a conversation about stuff that you find obviously troubling is probably important, even when you don't want to have it. And arguably, I remember Sheila Fogarty started talking about Andrew Tate when I was still fairly persuaded that it was wrong to give him attention or to give him oxygen. And in some ways, it is obviously wrong to do that. But in other ways, it isn't. It's important. You can't, look, if young people are being poisoned, not talking about the poisoner is a really stupid position, albeit one that I foolishly adopted myself. 11:36 is the time. So the question, the basis for this conversation is fairly obvious. Research showing that Generation Z increasingly see feminism as harmful and crucially think that it's harder to be a man than it is to be a woman. This is 1 in 4 UK males. And, you know, the fact that 20% of young people on social media know who Andrew Tate is should be worrying, but 20% have a favourable view of him. What is it appealing to? Where would the evidence be that most people would find absurd that it's easier somehow to be a man than a woman? Emma explains, they tell them they've been denied the privilege, by which they mean power, that their mythical forefathers definitely had, despite all the actual demographic data about poverty, wages and political disenfranchisement. So a sort of mythical past in which men like me would have enjoyed dominion over other men, but most importantly women. I mean, you wouldn't have done, would you? The clan leader, the Earl of the Manor might have done, but he would have had to send over your own female family members inside. So anyway, I'm getting distracted. Joe's in Portsmouth. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Joe.
Hi. I'm the founder and CEO of Engendering Change, and we work with various organisations to try to kind of promote equity and inclusion, and we do a lot of work in schools, and most of that's around relationships and sex education. So I've done a lot of work on this, both with boys and with teachers and sort of in education. And I'm also a mother of 2 boys who are 11 and 17. And so I feel like I've got, I suppose, quite a unique grip of what's going on and some ideas of what we should do.
When did you become aware of the need for an organisation like the one you went on to found, and how?
Well, my background's in teaching, so it was very evident to me. I used to say that I thought it was a real shame that things hadn't got better since I was at school. And now I would actually say in many ways they've got worse. And the urgency to act, I think, is more pressing than it ever has been. And that's against a very difficult climate where our government, after making relationships and sex education statutory, have then really undermined the entire thing, by whipping up moral panic, sharing lots of kind of rhetoric which is not evidence-based, which has criticised what's happening in classrooms. And so schools find themselves in this really difficult situation where we really need expert evidence-led RSE or relationships and sex ed, and yet at the same time, the government is making it scary to deliver. And so schools, they know they've got to do it, but they don't really know what they're doing. And unfortunately, a lot of the interventions which schools are doing to address misogyny and things like porn, unfortunately, although often they're well-intended, the impact of them is to further kind of ghettoise boys. And often when teachers, they'll be sent round a PowerPoint by one, senior leader who perhaps doesn't have much expertise themselves. It'll go round to all the staff who have had no training.
It's like the teacher who was put in charge of the cricket team 20 years ago who'd never held a cricket bat before.
Indeed, it is, and this is so easy to get wrong. And if you get it wrong, it's almost worse. Well, I think it is.
Well, of course it is, because you add an extra level of bogus victimhood to well, that's probably an unhelpful phrase to use. Can you tell me? And I appreciate that the full gamut of your experience and expertise. We're only going to be able to nibble at the edges of it. But if I had a teenage boy in front of me who believed that it's easier to be a woman than a man, or that feminism had been a force for bad, and I said, "Why is that, mate?" What would he say back to me? What would he say? How? What would he say?
What would he say?
Yeah.
Well,
when I said, "Why do you believe that? What's your proof?" What would he say?
I think a lot of young men are finding themselves in these real echo chambers online, and I don't know if you've read Men Who Hate
what's going to be
Women by Laura
echoed, though?
Bates.
What's going to be echoed?
Well, it will be things like women hate men.
Okay.
There are loads of feminists who want to see men killed.
Right.
So there's all these videos out there. I very much doubt they've been made by actual feminists.
Sure.
But, it'll be like, really negative towards men and saying the world would be better off without them.
Okay.
It's things like celebrations of International Women's Day, which I am a feminist and regard as really important, but which leave many boys feeling like they're not listened to. Or not
I
heard.
only chuckle because of what Richard Herring does every year on International Men's Day, because there is one, it turns out, but the refrain from the kind of kids you're describing is always, well, why isn't there an International Men's Day? You haven't properly answered my question, because you're describing the echo chamber. You're not really describing what is echoed within it. How is your life as a young boy worse because you're a boy than it would be if you're a woman? The mythical threat on the horizon, I understand that. They do the same with immigration. There's some people over there who are going to steal your birthright, going to steal your biscuits, going to steal your jobs. But what do I believe as a 15-year-old that makes my fortunes inferior to the fortunes of a 15-year-old girl in the same classroom? Do we know?
You believe you're a victim. Yeah. You believe that you've been left behind. You believe that girls are favoured over boys in school and in society. You believe that your teachers and your parents don't know what they're talking about, and often that is true.
That's always part of
And so
radicalisation, isn't it?
Exactly. Attempts to address this further entrench it when it's not done effectively. They believe they are being lectured at and preached to rather than listened to.
Which is why the work you do becomes so important and more challenging than perhaps people on the outside might appreciate. And I look forward to talking to you more, Joe. I know that my friend and colleague Natasha Devon is a huge admirer of the work that you do, and she, of course, moves in similar spaces, but the clock is against us. It is 11:43. The clock is against us, not least because the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, has today essentially undertaken a challenge to the narrative that sees him being blamed more than any other politician, perhaps, for the Post Office Horizon scandal. He's written a piece for The Guardian this morning under the headline, "I fell for post office lies and I'm sorry, but I won't be silent as Tories prey on victims' trauma." And Ed Davey will explain a little bit more about that and what he means after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:46 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mystery Hour on the way at 12. Before that, well, I wonder if you know what the following politicians have in common. We'll do it in descending order. Kevin Hollinrake, Dean Russell, Jane Hunt, Paul Scully, Kelly Tolhurst, Andrew Griffiths, Margot James, Anna Soubry, Joe Swinson twice, Jenny Willett, the Right Honourable Norman Lamb and Sir Edward Davey MP. They have all, if you don't know this, and if you do, frankly, you should get out more. But they have all been the relevant minister for the Post Office during the 14 years and counting now in which the Post Office Horizon scandal has unfolded. But I suspect, with the possible exception of Kevin Hollinrake and Joe Swinson, that if I'd asked you to name those ministers, the only one you would have been able to name is Sir Ed Davey, which is part of the reason, I presume, why today he has elected to write an article apologising for falling for post office lies, but pledging that he won't be silent as Tories prey on victims' trauma. And Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats and MP for Kingston and Surbiton, joins me now.
Good morning, James.
What precisely are you apologising for?
Well, when I was Post Office Minister, 11 days in, I sent a letter to Alan Bates saying I didn't want to meet him because government owned the Post Office, didn't run it. That obviously annoyed him, quite understandably, and it took me 5 months to meet him. I wish I'd met him earlier. And I'm particularly apologising because when I listened to him, a very reasonable man, and his concerns, particularly about Horizon computer system, and I put his concerns to the Post Office, I didn't uncover their lies. And their lies were really quite profound, particularly on the Horizon computer system. What worried Mr. Bates was that the sub-postmaster they were told the sub-postmaster was the only person who could enter their budget, their financial system on the computer. And there was no possibility of remote access. And Mr. Bates was questioning that. And so I questioned the Post Office on that and said, look, is there remote access? Are there any bugs in the system? Is it robust? And I was told categorically that it had been independently assured there was no remote access. Now, we subsequently learned, years later, that was a complete and utter lie, and they knew it. There was a report from Ernst & Young in 2011, while I was the minister, that the Post Office received saying there was remote access. So they lied to me. And what I'm apologising for is not seeing through those lies. Post Office kept lying to other ministers, to the judges, to courts, and that lie was only finally exposed when an insider from Fujitsu blew the whistle, and we had a BBC panorama in August 2015, then we had the High Court in 2019. But I feel I should apologise for not seeing through those lies, though I have to say it would have been pretty tough.
Of course, and yet it's now the 1st of February 2024, and you've referred back to various milestones in this saga at which that apology probably became necessary or at least desirable, the latest of which would probably be the 1st of January when Mr. Bates versus the Post Office began to be broadcast on ITV to extraordinary effect, as I think everybody knows. So why has it taken you so long?
Well, the story is horrendous. I watched the ITV drama, and you can't be anything other but distress for the hundreds, maybe even thousands of postmasters who were affected. And I said very early on that I regret it. I probably should have said much earlier. Accept that. I should have said sorry earlier.
Why didn't you?
Well, I felt it, and I don't know why. I just probably should have said it. I was saying regret, and I felt that was getting over that point. But I probably should have said sorry earlier.
What happened here in this interview earlier this month? Last month?
I was lied to. Why not draw a line under it then and just apologise? Can you apologise to sub-postmasters?
Of course, I regret.
That's not an apology.
Well, I've said of course. I think it really is.
Well, why don't you say I am sorry?
Well, I've said time and time again that I deeply regret.
That's not that I am sorry.
That I was lied to.
That's not an apology.
I was lied to on an industrial scale.
Why can't you say sorry?
Well, of course, I feel that I'm right to express regret for not getting to the bottom.
Why can't you say sorry? It's the least they deserve. Look what they've been through. Just say sorry for your part in not having got to the answers.
My heart goes out to the hundreds of people.
Not enough to say sorry.
Hit, and I deeply regret that we didn't get to the bottom of the lies that were told.
Paul Brand at ITV there, giving you the third degree. And today you are saying sorry. So why
I probably should have said sorry to Paul Brand. I really, and I regret not saying sorry. Yeah. And if I gave
it's a lot of regret.
Yeah. Well, if I gave the impression that I didn't feel deeply sorry for the hundreds of families who've suffered, sorry for me not meeting Alan Bates earlier and not seeing through the lies, of course I should say sorry for that.
And have you been in touch with Alan Bates since the drama unfolded?
Yeah, I've contacted him, waiting to hear back, but he's incredibly busy and in demand, obviously.
He certainly is. I ran through the list of ministers who had held the position that you held, and all of whom would have had responsibility for this as the story developed. Indeed, many of them would have been in the chair. Why do you think your head is much further above the parapet on all of these issues than anybody else who has held the same role during the relevant period?
Well, this was a very long one. I think it's even longer because Horizon came in 1999. So I
think I've just done a sum. I think you had the job for 19 months.
Yeah, 90 months out of that 20 years. Yeah, that's right. The Tory press, I think, well, the Tory party, its election year, I think they're trying to get a scapegoat. They talked about blaming it on Tony Blair. They tried to blame Keir Starmer. They're trying to blame me, and I think they're trying to blame others. And you do sometimes see this with particularly their friends in the Tory media, that they try and find scapegoats and try and distract people. And they're distracting them from the Conservative Party's appalling record in government, aren't they? I mean, I think this is the most shocking government I've ever witnessed. I'm determined to lead the Liberal Democrats to beat lots of Conservative MPs. And you can see the Conservative Party clearly see as a threat. That's why they're attacking us.
What do you mean when you say you won't be silent as the Tories prey on victims' trauma?
Well, when you're weaponising something like this, which is a tragedy, I mean, we should actually have the forefront of our minds the hundreds of sub-postmasters who need to be quickly and properly compensated. They've already waited far too long. They should be fully exonerated, and they should get the truth from the public inquiry, which I've supported, and the Metropolitan Police criminal investigation. And for the Conservatives to put this into a sort of political weapon, I think is just... It's unfair to the postmasters. Why aren't they focusing in on getting that compensation? We saw, I think it was on the front page of the Telegraph today, Alan Bates is expressing real horror that the government isn't coming up with a proper compensation package even now. So, I see it as my job, I'm sure other people do, to fight for the sub-postmaster for that compensation. And you heard lots of Conservative ministers and MPs jumping up and down about this, but I don't know if they've gone onto the airways today to back up Alan Bates. They certainly ought to be.
Describing the settlement he's been offered as derisory and cruel. Most people listening, Ed Davey, will have watched the drama, or most people who have watched the drama and who are listening today will struggle with the scepticism. I understand that you say that. Well, I understand that you were lied to. That's a matter of record, and thanks to the work of journalists like Nick Wallace in bringing whistleblowers forward, that is now a matter of record, not a matter of opinion. But the weight of evidence, the fact that you had to essentially decide that hundreds of sub-postmasters, previously blameless pillars of their respective communities, were all coincidentally defrauding the post office all stealing from the post office at the same time. Do you never get even the vaguest whiff of rat during this period?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the numbers that I was told were much smaller. I mean, Alan Bates was representing about 100. And when I put those sorts of questions to the post office, they didn't tell me about the huge number they were prosecuting. What was really interesting when you watch the drama, you remember that scene in that community hall when they all said that the post office said they were the only one with problems, and then there was everyone who was the only one according to the post office. And that was the way they treated their advice on how many of us were being affected by this.
But 100 is still a big number.
It is a big number, and that's why I took his concerns really seriously and asked serious questions. And not only did they give me the assurances about that the Horizon system was robust and had been independently assured, they said, look, these people have gone to court. Some people have pleaded guilty. Judges have found them guilty. Are you wanting to overturn the judge's minister? So, that was the sort of situation you were
This
in.
would be your civil servant saying that to you?
Yeah, I think on behalf of the post office, I'm not blaming officials. I think the blame lies fully and squarely on the post office.
Are you going to name any names? Who lied to you?
Well, the sort of people in charge of the post office at this time was, first of all, a guy called David Smith and then Paula Reynolds. They will have had other people in their team. And one of the reasons I was so keen to champion a public inquiry after the High Court case in 2019, when we got the full exoneration of at least Alan Bates's group, was because I do think we need that public inquiry to get to the truth. I'm delighted the Metropolitan Police have opened a criminal investigation. I want to give evidence to that inquiry. I believe I'm going to be called. And it's essential, because I think when you think about the sub-postmasters, and let's remember, they should be the top of mind. They have had horrendous experience, horrendous. Some people committed suicide. People lost their businesses, their houses. Some people's marriages were broken up. I mean, I have 2 sub-postmasters in my own constituency. One went to prison for 16 months for something he did not do. They should be the right to the front of our mind, getting that compensation, fair and generous and quick, getting them exonerated so they can hold their heads up high as I think they should now, but they need that publicly said, and then they need to deserve the truth. And they deserve system change, by the way. One of the things I wrote in my article today was I think this shows that the system is rotten on so many levels, not just the way the right-wing press and the Tory party are weaponising, that's part of it, but the fact that you have these arm-length bodies like the Post Office where ministers don't have day-to-day control at all. And that model, I think, is broken. And I think how the system responds to crises and scandals is broken. The laws around whistleblowers, for example. As I said earlier, the whistleblower was core to finding the truth in this. But our laws around whistleblowers are pathetic. They're way behind other countries. We need to give much more support to people who are prepared to blow the whistle and say there's a scandal happening here, and give them real protection so that they're not in any way disadvantaged by telling the truth.
Have you been in touch with Paula Reynolds at all since the programme was aired, or since? No. When did you last speak to her?
Oh, I think when I was a minister.
Right. And those are the only 2 names that you're putting into the names that are already in the public sphere, David Smith and Paula Reynolds, because the phrase you use repeatedly is we were reassured time and again that the Horizon system wasn't working. What was the nature of these reassurances, and who was giving them to you personally or your
when I very occasionally met the Post Office people, but primarily I went through the officials. That's how you do it. And after the meeting with Alan Bates, I asked officials, and then of course I followed up with the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, who clearly and understandably not liked by Alan Bates and the Sub-Postmasters, because they went to their, like a trade union, the National Federation, and they didn't help them. But I didn't know that, so I went to what I considered to be the trade union for Sub-Postmasters, the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. I said, is it true? I've had this case, I've seen Alan Bates. What do you think about it? And they backed up the Post Office line.
Nick Wallace reserves particular disdain for the ombudsman, for the Federation of Sub-Postmasters, and it would be interesting to see what any public inquiry does regarding their role, as indeed it will one of your successors in the position and one of your predecessors as leader of the Liberal Democrats, Joe Swinson. The forensic accountant's second sight were dismissed by the Post Office under her watch. Should she be in the studio next after you, do you think? Does she have questions to ask?
I think Jo will speak for herself, but I'm absolutely sure she was lied to, as I was, and ministers of all political parties, right? Unlike the Conservatives, I'm not trying to weaponise this. I think Labour ministers before me would have been lied to, Jo, and Conservatives afterwards. One thing I would say about Conservative ministers, which I think they had the benefit of the Panorama programme in August 2015 when John Sweeney, the BBC team, with a Fujitsu Inside whistleblower, exposed this lie about remote access. They had the benefit of the High Court judgment in 2019. So, that wasn't available to Liberal Democrat or Labour ministers. And that was really the critical thing that Alan Bates and others had raised, and it comes out in the documentary.
Finally, are you fighting for your political life at the moment?
No. I mean, what's been really so encouraging is the way the party has responded to this. Really, they've seen it for what it is. They've seen the Conservative Party trying to weaponise this as a weapon. They've seen the Conservative Party pretty worried about the Liberal Democrats, actually, because there are many, many seats where we can beat the Conservative MPs and help change this awful government.
So, Ed Davey, thank you. Leader of the Liberal Democrats and MP for Kingston and Surbiton. I always feel a bit silly at this point because it is a Thursday, and after that very important and serious exchange, I now have to remind you that it's Mystery Hour next.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
It's 5 minutes after 12, a tiny little bit later than usual, but I mean, we call it Mystery Hour anyway. It's never actually an hour. There's a question for you. No, don't. Please, no, don't. Seriously, if you do, you're banned forever from the programme. If you have a mystery that needs solving, a riddle that needs unravelling, an enigma that needs fixing, then this is your chance. Your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. I'll solve one quick mystery for you. The Bank of England has just announced that it's holding rates at 5.25%, so you can tick that one off your list. And we'll start making another one. You ring in, or someone rings in, asks a question, a who, a why, a what, a when, a whither, a whence, even perhaps the occasional wherefore. And then someone else rings in with the answer. The management's decision is final, and the management is me. But rather excitingly, these days, latterly, in recent years, there has been a prize. There still is a prize for my favourite contribution of the day. And that prize is a brand spanking new Mystery Hour board game. Beautiful bit of kit, available, of course, at mysteryhour.co.uk, or by submitting my favourite contribution of the day. You don't even have to get the question right, or the answer right, or the question doesn't even have to be good. It's entirely in the eye of the beholder. And the beholder is me. And the full terms and conditions regarding that conversation can be found at lbc.co.uk. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. Ollie's in Exeter. Ollie, question or answer?
Oh, my goodness. Hello.
Hello. You can't be surprised. Just to clarify, we haven't phoned you.
I know, but I've tried before and never got on. Anyway, I don't want to waste time. You know when you look on your phone and it gives you the temperature for the day?
Yeah.
And then next to it says, feels like something else.
Yes.
How do they figure that out? Does somebody go out and stand in the cold and...
So you've got the temperature and then you've got the feels like because of wind chill factor and what else, and shade and other issues that I don't know what those issues are. I probably shouldn't have said anything. So you're going to have to help me out a bit because I'm not a serial consulter of the weather app on my phone. Does the feels like temperature is different from the official temperature, is it?
Often.
Yes.
More often than not, especially like today was 6 degrees.
Was it?
Feels like 3 when I got up this morning.
Is that right? So 6 well, that's quite a significant difference. That's a 100% disparity there. Right there, Ollie.
Yeah.
So why?
Yeah.
How? And indeed who?
I have no idea.
Who? determines
I live in Exeter, where the Met Office is. I should know, really.
Well, I don't know that. I live in London, where Parliament is. But goodness me, it's not as if I could answer any questions at all about how on earth we ended up with. Well, I tell a lie. I've written a book about how on earth we ended up with such an awful government. But now's not the time for me to plug my own products, Ollie. Good luck winning the Mystery Hour board game, though. Have we got an answer to that question? How do the temperature apps tell us that the temperature is 6 degrees, but it will feel like 3 degrees? Renee is in Enfield. Renee, question or answer?
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
No.
Oh.
This is awkward.
Hi.
Hello?
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 Hi.
Hello? No.
Hello, can you hear me better now?
Yes, that's incredible. What did you do?
I don't know what I did.
Okay. Question or answer?
I've got a question.
Carry on.
So recently I went on holiday to Italy and I went on a plane, and on the back of the plane you've got the plane code.
Yes.
And you've got a flag.
Yes.
But sometimes the flag is printed back to front. And my question is, why is that the case? Because when I went off to Italy, it was an Air Malta flight, and the Maltese flag was printed back to front with the cross to the other side, and not how the Maltese flag should look like. So my question is, why are the flags printed back to front on a plane sometimes?
Well, if it was an Italian flag and you were flying towards Italy, it would be the correct way round. But if you were it was an Italian plane and you were flying away from Italy, it would be reversed. No?
Oh.
No, I just made that up.
As in, you're on the wrong way.
No, I just made that up. I'm nearly there.
Oh.
But it's not that at all. I'll find out for you.
Thank you so much.
Pardon?
Thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'll try and get it on the board for you, Renaud. Stay safe. 10 minutes after 12 is the time. Libby is in Nantwich. Libby, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
I would like to know why there aren't more left-handed people.
Yes. That's a good question.
The reason I asked is that I've been working as an invigilator at adulted high school.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously sometimes it gets really, really boring. So I kind of amuse myself by counting how many left-handers there are.
Okay.
And I've noticed, based on obviously, in-depth scientific research, that in the core exams, it generally tends to be about 1 in 10, which I believe is, the
10%.
average number of left-handed people.
Yes.
But in things like further maths, it drops dramatically.
Really?
And again, in some of the humanities subjects, the number of left-handers goes up above that. Sometimes you get up to like 4 in 10.
Blimey.
And I just really like to know why it isn't, why the population didn't have something like a 50-50 split.
So you've just thrown in the bits about further maths and the humanities as interesting side orders, because I can't look into all of this at the same time, but I can look into why there isn't a more even spread of left-handers. I mean, the obvious answer, as I'm sure you know, is evolution, isn't it? And there being some sort of evolutionary disadvantage to being left-handed or advantage to being right-handed or both. But I can't think initially what that might be. Immediately, I can't think what that might be. Is it genetic? Do we know that it's genetic? Do left-handed people have more likely to have left-handed children?
I don't know, because my parents are both right-handed. I'm lefty. My parents are both right-handed. None of my children are left-handed.
Oh, well, that answers that question. Well, it does in your case. All right, so why is there not... We may have done something similar before, but you know the rules, Libby. If I can't remember the answer, then the question has never been asked. Why are there not more? Why is it such a small minority? I've got 10% in my head, but goodness knows there's a lot of stuff in my head that is absolute beeswax. So I don't know why we'd think that was necessarily true. 12:12 is the time. Ewan's in Birmingham. Ewan, question or answer?
Hi, James, it's a question.
Carry on.
It's about recipes, and I want to apologise for putting your recipe the other week in inverted commas on Twitter. I'm sorry, mate.
What do you mean?
The Brussels sprout recipe. I put the recipe word in inverted commas, and you...
Oh, you did, didn't you? Yes.
I'm so sorry.
I was not very happy about it. How can it not be a recipe? You've got ingredients. You've got ingredients that you combine, and it involves cooking. So how is that not a recipe, Ewan?
I'm wrong, and I was flippant. I do apologise.
That's all right. It's you and Ed Davey. Everyone's saying sorry on this programme today. Did you enjoy it?
I did. God, it tasted amazing.
It's incredible, right? Even the cheesemakers got in touch with me. Santa Gur sent me some free cheese.
They've got drowning in the stuff.
Well, they didn't send me that much, actually, but I've got through all the stuff that they did. But there's 3 different types. Did you know this? There's the there's the normal cheese, which I think you used, didn't you? You didn't use the cream cheese.
No, I thought you were talking about the crumbly one.
No.
And And then I realised there was the cream one, and I thought, yeah.
So there's the cream one, and there's the crumbly one, but there's a whipped one as well, which I hadn't seen.
I don't know that.
No, nor would I. I think it might be VIP sort of level stuff, Ewan, you know, like tap on the nose type territory. And that is not for your sprouts. That's just for a nice little bit of baguette, scoop it in the bowl, and man, I actually had it for lunch yesterday. Anyway, I digress. Best bit of marketing that company's ever done, sending me 3 tubs of free cheese. Question or answer?
It's a question about recipes. My mother used to keep a load of old recipe books, and she's got some that are incredibly old. And she, the measurements were always imperial, yes, for the more recent ones, but she's got some that say nothing else other than cup of.
Yes.
And she always explained it to me that it was about proportions. It didn't matter how many cups you had or how big your cup was. Just as long as you had 3 of them related to everything else, then it was fine.
Yeah.
And they all reference stick of butter, which I know the Americans still reference stick of butter. Now, I know what the weight of it is. That's not the question. The question is, if cup related to a cup and an object, what was the stick?
Yeah, so because if a stick is denoting the weight, then it can't work in the same way that a cup does.
Yeah, so I don't. But she could never tell me the answer to the question.
So
she understood the cup proportions bit, but the stick was lost in the mist.
Well, are we sure that recipes would refer both to cups and sticks?
No, that's why I'm ringing.
Well, if they don't refer to cups and sticks, we haven't got a problem, have we?
Well, no, you get cups and sticks in the same recipe.
You would, that's what I asked you.
A stick of butter and a cup of flour.
Okay. Well, I think there's a sort of broad consensus on what a cup is, because I know from Nigella's recipes always you press a button to turn it from English to American and then American back to British.
No, it's not the weights I'm worried about, because my mum always explained that the cup was about proportion, so you could have each.
Yeah, but I mean, you put me in a very uncomfortable position, because I think your mum might have been wrong.
Oh, okay.
I think there is consensus on what a cup is, because an American cup is different from a UK cup, mate.
Right.
Certainly on a rice maker, you can't be faffing about with cups. It's a really specific measurement. And, you put 2 cups and then top up the water to a certain level. If you were using random cups of different sizes, you'd have rice coming out of your ears.
Would you not have 2 cups of rice and 2 cups of water?
Yeah, but not if you that might work, but you'd not be topping it up to the level in the rice cooker where it says 2 cups, you see.
True. But that's kind of the evolution of the fact that there is now a standard.
I mean, there's a question there somewhere. I'm just not entirely sure we've pinned down exactly what it is. So just general inquiries about cups and sticks.
Why is it a stick?
Why is it a stick?
Is it a stick? Is it a physical piece of stick?
It probably was. It probably would have been a way for them to sell it back in the day, wouldn't it? A stick as a block, a stick. You don't want a block because it'll go off quicker in the days before refrigeration. So I'm all right, thank you, missus. I'll just have a stick.
There you go.
We'll find out. I like it, Ewan. Happy eating, happy munching. Try and get hold of that whipped one if you can, seriously. 12:16 is the time. Ewan's in Birmingham. Of course, I'm in Wolverhampton tomorrow night, and I think it's the only gig I've done since November the 2nd when the book came out. Or no, October the something. I think there's still some tickets. I think Wolverhampton is poised to let me down and be the only non-sold out event of my entire book tour. But that's tomorrow night at Wolfram Halls in Wolverhampton, if you fancy coming along. It should be a good night. 12:16 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 12. You're listening to Mystery Hour with me. We want to know what's the difference between the temperature and what the temperature feels like. How do they measure it, and how can they be so different, often quite markedly different? Renee's question about flags on a plane was even simpler than I thought. My answer was a bit stupid because I gave the impression that they took the flags off the planes and changed them depending on which direction they were flying in. But actually, if you think about American soldiers and epaulets and stuff, anyway, the question's on the board. Why do the flags on planes sometimes face the wrong way and sometimes they face the right way? Why are there so few left-handed people? Or if you prefer, why aren't there more left-handed people? And finally, what's a stick of butter all about? Sounds like a tongue twister, that, doesn't it? Or a nursery rhyme. Peter Piper picked it. What's a stick of butter all about? David's in Chepstow. David, question or answer?
Hi, James. Great show.
Thank you, mate.
I'm ringing in about mammals. So humans are mammals.
Yes.
We're born. We have an umbilical cord connected to our afterbirth.
Yes.
The cord is cut manually and clamped.
Yes.
What happens to other mammals in the animal kingdom? How do they manage their umbilical cords? They can't clamp them, so what do they do?
I think they just chomp through them, mate.
So how do they stop them bleeding out then? Because we clamp ours to stop presumably to stop ourselves bleeding out. So what happens?
I think they that they have evolved differently from us.
Okay.
And therefore they don't need to worry about bleeding out.
Yeah. So gorillas and chimpanzees, very similar to us. I was thinking about it and I thought, this is a good one for
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, do animals have belly buttons? Is a sort of obvious follow-up question to this, isn't it?
And are they outies or innies?
I mean, I know that cats bite through them. I'm not joking, because we had cats, or some friends of ours had. I've seen cats giving birth. I've seen cats bite through an umbilical cord, but I don't know why. The blood supply from the placenta, isn't it? So it's going to have something to do with the placenta, isn't it? I don't know why I'm even muddling around on this one. It's not as if I'm going to stumble across the answer by accident, is it? In the context of this conversation, but it's But I know that cats bite through them, so that's part of your. Because I mean, your question was literally, what do mammals do to cut through?
Mammals, yeah. But I was specifically thinking about primates because we're a primate. And I was just thinking,
well, you should have said that, because I mean, theoretically, by having witnessed a cat biting through an umbilical cord, I have theoretically answered your question.
You have, yeah.
But I'm going to leave it on the board, nonetheless.
Marvellous.
All right.
Yeah.
Mind how you go.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, David. Stay safe. 22 after 12 is the time. Mike's in Taunton. Mike, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, Mike.
So it's the flag question on aircraft.
Try not to make the rest of us feel too stupid. All right.
Yeah, it's really straightforward.
Yeah,
you say. So you imagine you're looking at a flagpole, and the flagpole is to the left of the flag flying. That's the part that's called the hoist. Is at the effectively the nearest the flagpole. The bit of the flag at the far end is called the fly. Yeah. And if you are looking at the flag such that the flagpole is on the left, it will look to be the right way round.
Correct.
If you go round the other side and look at it so that the flagpole is on the right of the flag, the flag will effectively be backwards. So on aircraft bodies, they're effectively like a flagpole. So from the starboard side, it will be the right way round, and from the port side, no, I've got it the wrong way round. From the port side, it will be the right way round. From the starboard side, it will be backwards.
So, I mean, to make things even simpler, you just need to imagine that the tail fin was made of glass and you only had a flag on one side.
Yeah, that would work.
There you go. So that's 'cause what I've done there, you see, as a radio expert, is I've painted a picture in people's minds, Mike, whereas you were relying on your verbal skills to describe it. And I have created an image now in people's minds in which they immediately understand what you just brilliantly described. So between us, we've done words and pictures.
What a team.
What a team. You can keep the round of applause, though, mate. I've got them coming out my ears.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Oh, hang on. Qualifications.
I'm a glider pilot.
Wow,
we don't
really?
have flags typically. Yeah, we don't typically have flags on gliders, but I'm a bit of an aviation buff, so I read that years ago.
What if you were doing a bit of gliding near a border of another country? Would you need one then?
Well, the club record from the club that I fly at in Devon.
Yeah.
So imagine this, taking off early in the morning and flying all day without touching the ground. The club record is Germany.
No.
Seriously.
I had no idea.
Yeah, pretty amazing effort by a chap called Will.
Well done, Will, some years ago. What's the appeal of gliding as opposed to a small engined plane?
Well, I think it's the difference between sailing, on canvas and a powerboat. So there's kind of a bit more skill to it. You've got to read the sky, read the weather, work out how it's all going to pan out on the day. There's a bit more to it.
And you're a bit more in tune with nature, I suppose, aren't you? As opposed to battling it, as it were. I've always been fascinated. I think I'm too old now. I don't know about you, but I've become less bold as I've got older. But I would have really loved to go on a glider flight when I was younger, but now I think I'd get the willies.
No, you don't need boldness. There's a saying in flying that you get old pilots and bold pilots, but you don't get old, bold pilots.
I've never heard that before. Yes, I rather like it. Thank you, Mike. Stay safe. Don't be bold. Don't be bold. You can't help being old. None of us can. 25 minutes after 12 is the time. Jennifer is in Stilton. Jennifer, question or answer?
Hey, buddy, you okay?
Very well, mate. How are you?
Well, I've been better. So I keep... Sorry if I stumble on my words, by the way.
No, you take your time.
I keep having strokes, so I've had two. And because of that, I keep on having MRIs.
Oh, my days.
Okay, so this is where the question comes from. So I have my MRI, and I'm fascinated. I appreciate that they're obviously the picture is sort of through a magnetic field, but they are so loud. Like, it'll go clonk, clonk.
They are extraordinarily loud. Oddly, for reasons that I won't go into. I was in the room with an MRI scanner just 2 weeks ago, Jen, and I thought it was like a really bad drum and bass DJ. There was a kind, because there'd be some of the noises coming out of that machine. When they give you earplugs. They give you earplugs.
Yeah. But still, and it goes me, boom, 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 boom.
That's it, drum and bass.
I'm trying to visualise it.
Yeah.
But and obviously, given technology these days and
you'd have thought someone might have come up with a quiet one by now.
Precisely.
Well, they're sound waves. They're probably sending sound waves through your brain, so they can't. No, not that. No. Apparently.
No, they can't, because you can have it on all different parts of the body.
Great. Do you know that you won't believe this, but every year on about 4 separate occasions, something happens in my life that makes me think, I must remember to ask that on Mystery Hour, and then every single time I forget. And that is only about 2-3 weeks old, that question for me. And and there it is. You've got it in there.
I've been sent just for it.
Sent from heaven. And thank you for all the presents you keep sending in as well. It's absurdly generous of you. The crinkle cut, the Seabrook prawn cocktail crisps went down particularly well at Christmas.
Although I did feel bad about thinking about how you'd get them home on public transport.
I worked it out. I ate them all.
Yeah.
I ate them all on the day they arrived. Jen, you take care of yourself. All right. Stay safe and stay strong. I'm sorry for what you're going through. It's 28 after 12 is the time. Why are they so loud? If you've never been, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But my God, they're loud. 03456060973. Lewis is in Putney. Lewis, question or answer?
Answer, James. I'm here to correct the record.
Go on,
Left-handedness.
Yes.
Because I answered this about 2 years ago on Mystery Hour, and then I looked it up and found out I was wrong.
Oh, hang on. Well, first of all, can we withdraw Lewis's round of applause, please, Keith? Thank you very much. Carry on, Lewis.
So the technical answer I gave a couple of years ago was we don't actually know. Yes. And the technical answer is still we don't actually know, but the theories have updated.
Oh, go on.
So they think handedness is linked to bipedalness in mammals because you only get left-handed kangaroos or red kangaroos. And it's due to a part of the brain, which is in the left hemisphere. I've forgotten, it's like BGC12, which is linked in humans to tool use. And they think, because from archaeological data like cave paintings, it was always right-handed tool makers. And they do think that back in the ages of history, all humans would have been right-handed, all Neanderthals were right-handed.
Okay.
And it's a random mutation of genetics that has caused left-handedness to come about because certain sports, combative sports like boxing and MMA, left-handed boxers and fighters have a better win rate than right-handed ones because most people who are right-handed expect a blow from the corresponding hand.
Yes, of course.
But if you're left-handed, you've got that advantage. And so they think that also corresponds to a potential slight advantage. So although there is a lower level of left-handedness in the population, it's a gradually increasing one. And like the lady said...
So it is actually evolution in action?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So, and it's the opposite of what my original presumption was, that there must be an evolutionary disadvantage to it because it's in such a small number. But in fact, it started from scratch in the history of humanity, and because it provides some advantage in some circumstances, it's going up, not down.
Yes, and that's correct. And like you see, and you won't see it in other sports like darts, for example. That there's no advantage to being left-handed there or right-handed.
Well, that's a lovely answer. What about golf?
I don't know about golf. I would assume the same because it's not a combative sport. It's not like football where you're left-footed.
You're doing most of your training, most of your sparring with a right-handed fighter. You get used to it, and then you get in the ring with a left-handed fighter, and he clocks you one.
Exactly.
Qualifications, please.
A degree in medical genetics, and I looked this up a couple of years ago to make sure that Mystery Hour was correct, because whilst the disgraced former Prime Minister might not correct the record, I will.
Look at that, Lewis, showing the way, shining a light and damning the disgraced former Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the same time. Round of applause for Lewis. It's about his millionth. Just take one away and give him another one back straight away. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Quite a lot of MRI-related action coming in now, thanks to Jen in Stilton. This is from Paul in Manchester. I don't know why it tickled me. He goes, I had an MRI and I was so bored I identified the various noises as follows. He actually uses the word thus. It's one of my favourite words. Star Wars phasers. That's yeah. Shall I do all of them or would that be weird? Avant-garde 50s score melodrama. Yeah. That's a sort of thumpy, drummy one, isn't it? I can't do that one, mate. I barely do Star Wars phasers. Bouncing ball, followed by pneumatic drill. We all recognise. Tommy gun. Stamping machine that turns into a nuclear reactor alarm. That's another one I recognise. The bouncing ball, but heavier. You've got a lovely way with words, Paul. In fact, looking at this all laid out on my screen, it looks like a poem. In the first two scans, there was also a Hammond organ. Occasional techno beats. We had quite a lot of techno beats. And an occasional tapping like kids are viewing you through the one-way glass. It is a veritable potpourri of sound effects, most of which, as Jen attests, are incredibly loud. Now, that's a very jolly MRI-related contribution to the programme. This one is less cheering, for me at least, although it'll probably tickle you. Dean's been in touch. He says, I had an MRI last year, James. It was at 10 a.m. and they asked me what radio station I wanted on my headphones. So I said, LBC, please. And afterwards, the nurse said, it goes on a bit, doesn't he? After one of your monologues. Hey, you can't do that. It's just outrageous. Duncan's in Richmond. Duncan, question or answer?
Hello, mate. It's a question, please.
Carry on.
Has the gestation period for our species always been the same, or has it changed through evolution?
Why'd you ask?
Well, we've just had a baby. She's 9 weeks old now. And I was watching in a break time, a rare break, I was watching a documentary, a National Geographic documentary. And these little baby monkeys can grip their mum on day one.
Yeah.
And I thought, our baby, as all human babies, are completely helpless.
So
have we, when we were monkey, years and years, millennia ago, as we've evolved, were we able to do that? And has it changed? And funnily enough, monkeys' gestation periods seem to be shorter than ours.
Are there any other mammals that are utterly? There are quite a few that are utterly helpless when they're born, but not very long, not for very long.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of horses, they can walk on the first day of birth, can't they? The first day of life, can't they? And so we're just so underdeveloped. So has it always been like that, or did we?
Well, hang on a minute. That's a bit anti-human, mate. It's a bit humanish. So maybe all the other animals are overdeveloped. Have you ever thought of that?
Well, yeah, it could be.
What has it always been a 9 month?
Has it always been 9 months?
I presume it has. But it's a nice question. It's surprising how many questions have a sort of evolutionary flavour on this programme. It must say something about the stuff that we wonder about. Duncan, congratulations on the new arrival. I'll try and get you an answer to that. 12:38 is the time. What have we got? Why do temperatures feel like? And we've got two temperatures on the average app. One will tell you the temperature and the other will tell you what it feels like. What's going on there? We've done the flags on a plane. We've done the left-handed. That was Lewis. Stick of butter. What's a stick of butter all about? What's a stick of butter all about? Sounds like a George Formby song. Ding, 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 ding. What's a stick of butter all about? Umbilical cords. What do other mammals do with umbilical cords? Don't look at me like that. That was just off-the-cuff sort of comedy references. What's a stick of butter? Why are MRI scanners so loud? And have humans always had the same gestation period? I like all of these questions this week. Sandra's in Helston in Cornwall. Sandra, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on.
Hi. It's an answer to the umbilical cord question.
Okay, yes.
So the umbilical cord doesn't contain a huge amount of blood, and it will only deliver blood for as long as the placenta is still attached to the wall of the uterus. As soon as the placenta detaches, there's no longer an active blood flow.
So you can just chew your way through it. And then
exactly.
It'll just probably wither off a bit.
Like our infants do. We clamp and cut the cord.
Yeah.
We try and do delayed cord clamping now because when the baby is born, a third of its blood volume is still in the placenta, so we give it time to come back.
Yeah.
It's called placental transfusion, and that protects them against childhood anemia and stuff like that. So then we clamp and cut the cord, and effectively there's a valve inside the abdomen at the umbilical cord base that then closes, so that blood flow is no longer part of its circulating volume.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
So the majority of animals will, when the cord has stopped pulsating, just chew through it. In mammals that are really tall, so like elephants and giraffes.
Yes, I knew you were going to say giraffes.
Their infants fall to the ground and the cord snaps.
Oh, Lord.
But because they're larger animals, they have a greater circulating volume, so they can afford to lose a little bit, so it doesn't affect them adversely.
Well, that's a very comprehensive answer, Sandra. Thank you.
Very much.
What's your qualifications?
I'm a midwife. I could also answer the gestation question.
You're not allowed to.
I'm not allowed to.
No, got very strict rules. Very strict rules. But you've got yourself a round of applause. So you should.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to last caller and their new arrival.
Yes, to Duncan and his partner. Thank you, Sandra. That's a lovely answer. Sometimes you can tell as an answer comes in that you're never going to forget it. And other times I've forgotten it before the programme is finished. I don't know why. I guess that's some people are good communicators. I'm not going to insult anyone by suggesting some of the answers we've had already that I've already forgotten. But I shall always remember Sandra's answer, I think, until, of course, someone rings in and asks the same question, at which point, no doubt you'll be queuing up to point out that I've already forgotten the answer I said I'd never forget. Deborah's in Swanscombe. Deborah, question or answer?
It's a question.
Carry on.
When somebody passes away and they have tattoos, do those tattoos retain their colour? Do they go instantly? Do they not go?
Do they not? Do they not remove them and give them to the family?
Well, I never thought of that.
Or possibly they photocopy them for posterity. I don't know.
I never thought of that either.
No, I don't know, and I hesitate to ask why you want to know now that I've made two very poor jokes about the prospect of.
You don't want to ask me. You don't want to ask.
No, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask. But I mean, what makes you think they might change? Just because the skin has changed, the canvas has changed, therefore the art might have changed as well.
Well, I'm not sure because for some reason in my head I've got it that your blood has got something to do with your skin. So if the blood's gone, then would it change?
What would happen? I mean, I presume as the body dries out, it would change, but not immediately on death. I wouldn't. Well, I'll find out. What happens to your tattoos after you die?
Yeah.
Crikey, I really want to know why you want to know now, but I can't ask you because
I can tell you if you like.
Well, will it make my two jokes look really insensitive?
No.
You promise, because you can't just say it won't, and then I end up looking really insensitive.
No, I would never
why do you want to know?
To you. Well, because I've got tattoos.
Oh, that's
so.
Right.
I just wonder whether they would, eventually go.
Yeah. Oh, you could. I mean, I won't do any more poor jokes. I think I was riding by the seat of my pants already on that one. So, what will happen to Deborah's tattoos in the horrible event and hopefully long distant event of her shuffling off this mortal coil? 10, 12, even 42 is the time. Greg's in Gloucester. Greg, question or answer?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Hi, it's a question.
Hello.
How are you? You're right.
Yeah, very well, mate.
I want to know why albums are called albums.
Right. I know this. I actually know this, but carry on.
Do you? Well, the word album means white, or albus means white. So we've got the Beatles releasing the White. You and I probably put photos in a photo.
No, albumen is white.
Yeah, but that comes from albus, meaning white.
Oh, okay. Go on then. Yeah.
So, and if you look up the word, it says albus or album.
Yeah, but but album, as in a collection of things, has nothing to do with the colour white.
It's according to any source that I've seen, because I've been curious about this for a while.
Yeah, go on.
It stems from the same Latin word meaning white.
But I know why they're called albums, even though there's only one of them. But that's not the question that you're going to ask, is it? But I'm going to answer it anyway because it gives me a good opportunity to recommend that everybody visits the Brentford Musical Museum, or the musical museum in Brentford, which I read recently is facing financial struggles post-COVID, and where you will have a most entertaining and enlightening time, but particularly in the field of pianolas. So these were incredibly desirable items in the sort of turn of the century, late Victorian period.
I know them well, yeah.
You'd have a pianola in your house, and you'd have a load of things, the pianos that play themselves.
Yes,
and you'd have so that you'd have a collection of music that you played in it, and that was called an album. And then that slowly evolved as to become just one record, and you'd still call it an album. Which is both interesting.
So why then do stamp collectors collect their stamps in a stamp white?
Well, that's the point I'm making now, is that this is not, fascinating though it is, and timely, and also community-spirited of me to recommend the Musical Museum in Brentford, where they also...
Get the plug in.
Greg, they also have a fully functioning Wurlitzer organ, and it's one of the only places in the country where you can watch a silent film with full Wurlitzer accompaniment.
Really?
Yeah, full Wurlitzer accompaniment. So you can watch like an Errol Flynn film or something like that. And
give them another plug.
The Musical Museum in Brentford. And there are a few people in the country who are still expert at playing, and all that. That's, of course, where the phrase bells and whistles come from, because they can play all the bells and whistles. So you've got things like, stagecoach sound effects and bells ringing and doo-doo-doo, horns, and it's all coming from the same amazing organ. And you can go there and watch it, but they are, I've read this week, struggling, and I think it was in the local paper, so do find. But anyway, what's it got to do with white is the question you're asking.
It is, yeah. I mean, you and I have a similar age. We probably used to collect photos, and we put them in a
photo album. Could it be that the white contains the yolk? Albumen.
Yes, albumen is the egg white.
Is the egg white, but what came
that
first?
Comes from the Latin stem word, which means white.
What came first, though, the album or the egg?
So what does a stamp album have to do with an egg white?
It contains the stamps in the way that the egg white encloses the yolk.
Okay, that's interesting. So next time I listen to the official on another radio station, listen to the official white charts on a weekend, I shall remember that it is to do with containing the yolk.
I'm not giving myself a round of applause for this, Greg, as things stand.
Can I just give a quick shout out to the glider guy, because he gave the Old and Bold pilots quote, and that was quoted in a Disney film in the 70s called The Black Hole by a robot called Vincent, and I'm a proud owner of the limited edition of one of the original soundtrack whites.
Soundtrack whites, well played. I mean, it's all happening on the show today, isn't it? I like that question, actually, but there may be, why is an album called an album when the root of the word would appear to be from the Latin for white? 0345 606 0973. Great work, Greg. 12:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:50 is the time. What happens to tattoos when the bearer perishes? Have humans always had the same gestation period? Why are MRI scanners so long? We've done the umbilical cord. And what's the stick of butter all about? And what was Ollie's question? I've forgotten Ollie's question. I've even written it down. I can't read my own writing. Oh, yeah, the temperature. I've written, sorry. Sometimes my doodles get in the way of my doodles. Jack's in St Albans. Jack, question or answer?
It's answer.
Carry on, mate.
So why are MRI scanners so loud?
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a clue in the name, so they're magnetic resonance imaging machines.
Yeah.
It's a large magnet spinning round and changing direction to do the different sort of imagery on you.
Well, I mean, I've large things spinning around quite often. They don't make anything like the racket that an MRI makes.
The change in direction as well, and the proximity you are to it.
Yeah, and it's very heavy, so the machinery used to move it makes a lot of noise as well.
Yeah.
I suppose before I start expressing more scepticism of what your qualifications are, scepticism of what your answer is, I should establish what your qualifications are.
Qualifications, I've had an inordinate amount of MRI scanners in my lifetime. And MRI scans in my lifetime.
Oh, you poor thing. And you asked, did
great
you?
Fun.
You got did you develop a taste for it, Jack? Did you start sort of thinking, oh, I love this one. This is my favourite track.
Yeah, I can fall asleep in them now.
Can you really?
Yeah.
Gosh. And you've asked, presumably, in the hospitals?
Yeah.
What,
I've asked the radiographers what's the big noise, and they've...
So it's the mechanicals of moving the magnet, essentially.
Yeah.
Right, that's a perfect answer. Round of applause for you.
Thank you.
Are you still having a lot? Are you still in the woods?
Yeah.
All right.
Annual fun of them. Just part to life, isn't it?
Well, apparently you can put me on the radio, and then a nurse will come up to you afterwards and say, "Blimey, he goes on a bit, doesn't he?" So
I'll do that next time.
There's that to look forward to. Jack, take care of yourself, mate. Thank you for that. It's a cracking answer. 12:52 is the time. So Jack's gone in on the MRIs. Greg asked the question about the albums. Darren, meanwhile, is in Plymouth. Darren, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on.
The answer to the feels like temperature versus the actual temperature.
Yes, please.
It's the function of your human body's ability to get rid of our body heat. So the actual temperature and the feels like temperature would be very similar in light winds and fairly average humidities, around about 80%.
Yeah.
But if the wind is increasing, therefore makes it windier, makes your body's ability to lose heat even faster. Therefore, it feels like a lower temperature. However, if the humidity increases past 80 up to 90, 95%, your human body ability to sweat decreases massively. Therefore, it feels like a higher temperature.
Well, I never... And how do they put a number on the temperature? Do they use calculations? Is it an algorithm into which you punch humidity, temperature, windiness?
Yes, as well as UV index as well.
So they don't send someone out into the street? Well, they wouldn't, would they? Because with a different...
I think they did that once, and then we got a calculation from there.
They've worked it back from there?
We don't do that.
That's a cracking answer. Thank you. Well, hang on. What are your qualifications?
I'm a meteorologist in the Royal Navy.
Oh, well, that's a cool job.
It's a pretty cool job.
That is a cool... I mean, you live and learn, don't you? It never crossed my mind that you... So does each ship have its own meteorologist, or do you work from shore?
So most will have their own.
Wow.
Most officers are trained in some way, shape or form in meteorology.
Is that right?
But then we also have a shore establishment which then gives support to other units.
And
which is where I work.
And you're a uniformed member of the Royal Navy as well?
That's right. And on the left side of my uniform, the flag is the right way around.
Well played. Very well played. Round of applause for Darren. That's called comedic callback, I think. It's well done, mate. 12:54 is the time. David's in Manchester. David, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
About tattoos. I was fortunate enough to be with both of my parents at the time they passed and held their hands.
Oh.
And when a person passes, almost instantly you can see the skin, the colour of it, and the texture change.
Gosh.
My dad had lots of kind of sailor-type tattoos, and when he passed, his skin became kind of translucent, so you could almost see through it. But and I don't know the scientific reasons, but the colours do slightly change. So in my dad's case, some of the reds became slightly more vivid, the blacks became a little bit duller, but the tattoos were still there. And I visited him a few times before they closed the casket. And then they were still there. And even over time, the skin changes. And I guess it would depend what I think it was Brenda, what she has done when she is when she passes, because my dad was embalmed, my mum wasn't. Really? And the texture of my father's skin was very different to my mum's because she wasn't embalmed and he was. So I don't know what the scientific reason is for that, but
doesn't matter,
she'll
mate.
still have her tattoos and they'll still be there for her family to see when they visit her.
When the time comes. What a lovely answer. I'm sorry you're so well qualified to answer it, really, David.
Well, it happens to us all, doesn't it?
This is very, very... Tattoos or not? Tattoos or not? Can we have a round of applause for David, please? Thank you, mate. Lovely stuff. Dan's in Croydon. Dan, question or answer?
Hello, James, mate. It is an answer.
Carry on.
Albums.
Yes.
The word can also be translated as blank. And so,
blank slate,
similar
actually.
to Spanish blanco. So you'll have a photo album that you get as a blank album, and you put it in. Musically, it goes right back to the early 19th century.
It goes back further. So it is white. It's the thing, they used to have it in the marketplace in ancient Rome. So you'd have a chalked up space that you could then write stuff on, like, there's a jumble sale this Thursday at 2:00. In a jumbleless sale this Thursday at 12. So Albus or Albo or something. So yes, that's it.
Exactly. And then you tie that into music with the blank music sheets where they would then write the notation. That then became a piece of music, which then became an album, and that's how we've got modern day albums with music.
Beautiful. So it's a space into which you put stuff, essentially, but it's got nothing whatsoever to do with eggs.
No, unfortunately not.
Qualifications?
Been a touring musician for 20 years and did some music theory study.
That'll do nicely. Round of applause for Dan, please.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, mate. And Dara is in Manchester. Dara, question or answer?
Answer, James, on the MRI question. It's Stuart's inquiry.
Is Stuart's inquiry or a simple embellishment and improvement on the original?
Pretty much a Stuart's inquiry. Nothing actually moves in an MRI scanner. It doesn't actually spin.
Right.
So there's three real things in an MRI scanner that make the noises. So when you walk into the MRI scanner, there's a kind of a background noise that makes a kind of a dunk-dunk noise every couple of seconds. That's what's called the cold head.
Yeah.
That's a compressor recompressing the helium.
Right.
So that it compresses it back into liquid helium because it's a main magnetic field, the main coil is bathed in liquid helium. It's a superconducting magnet.
Wow.
Then there's what we call an RF coil, radio frequency coil, which sits kind of closest to your head, and that makes those kind of chirpy noises, the cheep, the kind of the high-pitched noises.
Sounds a bit like being in a fax machine, doesn't it, having an MRI scan?
Yeah, and then outside the RF coil, there's a gradient coil, which is what makes the kind of big, more substantial banging noises.
This is a detailed answer, but I sense you've barely started, and Sheila Fogarty's already in the room. So
that's the three things that make the three noises. Nothing spins, but what we do is we rotate the magnetic field in the coil. Nothing actually physically moves, and they're the three things that generate three different types of noise that you hear in an MRI scanner.
Extraordinarily detailed answer. What are your qualifications, Darren?
I have a PhD in neuroimaging and psychiatry.
Well, that answers that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great stuff. I think we're done, aren't we? Board game, come on. I mean, crikey, this week. I'm going to give it to Duncan because he didn't get an answer and he's got a new baby. So Duncan and Duncan's partner will be able to play the Mystery Hour board game when perhaps baby's not sleeping that well. It's only 9 weeks old. It's
a good idea.
It is, isn't it? There are a lot of contenders this week. And Jenny Stilton's already got one because I know that she took it to hospital and everyone on the ward enjoyed playing it as well. So there you go. That's it. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.